You skipped it, you dissed it, you said it's a bore. But what if that film's got a little bit more? What if I don't like it? What if it's bad? What if it's awkward or lazy or sad? But what if it's genius, a total surprise? What if it's gold when I open my eyes? We're watching the films you love to avoid. Now sit down and deal with your cinephile void. What if I don't like it? Let's give it a spin. You might hate it or love it. Let's dive right in.
When people talk about the 1981 animated film Heavy Metal, the conversation usually splits in two directions. Some viewers defend it as a groundbreaking cult classic that pushed animation into adult territory. Others dismiss it as a chaotic relic of the 1980s counterculture. And the interesting thing is, both reactions are kind of right. And to understand why the film exists at all, you have to go back to the comics magazine that inspired it. The movie was adapted from Heavy Metal magazine, the American counterpart to the French publication Metal Hurlant. And the title Metal Hurlant literally translates to screaming metal. But despite how it might sound to American audiences, who often assume heavy metal refers specifically to the music genre, the magazine was never really about music. Instead, it was a showcase for counterculture art and storytelling. It had surreal science fiction, fantasy, eroticism, and experimental illustration that really pushed the boundaries of what comics at the time were doing. In other words, the film didn't come from the world of rock music so much as the world of avant-garde comics. That magazine was founded by influential European artists, including Jean Giraud, better known as Moebius, along with Philippe Drouillet and Jean-Pierre Dionnet. Their work helped redefine science fiction illustration in the 1970s, blending surreal illustration, adult storytelling, and experimental world building. The American edition launched in 1977, and within just a few years, its popularity made Hollywood take notice. And that's unusually fast for an adaptation. Today, studios often wait decades before turning a property into a film. But in this case, the project moved very quickly, and that was partly because it had support from National Lampoon, which was expanding their satire magazine into film production at the time. Instead of adapting a single comic storyline, the filmmakers tried something more ambitious. They attempted to recreate the experience of reading the magazine itself. And the result is an anthology film, a collection of animated stories connected by a framing narrative about a mysterious green orb known as the Lochnar, an object that represents pure cosmic evil. This structure is what makes the film both fascinating and difficult. Each segment was animated by a different team and inspired by different artists associated with the magazine. Because of that, the film constantly shifts tone and visual style, from dystopian science fiction to fantasy adventure to outright horror. From a film perspective, it almost functions as a showcase of what adult animation in the early 1980s was like. The film also features a surprisingly strong comedic voice cast, including John Candy, Harold Ramis, Eugene Levy, and Joe Flaherty, many of whom were known for their work on SCTV. But the same qualities that make the film historically interesting can also make it feel uneven as a viewing experience. Because the movie jumps from one style and genre to another, it never really settles into a single narrative rhythm. And just as you begin to connect with one world, the film moves somewhere else. And culturally, the film is very much a product of its time. It was deliberately designed to prove that animation could include adult themes like violence, sexuality, and counterculture aesthetics. But that experiment also comes with some very dated gender dynamics and a heavy reliance on the male gaze. So whether you enjoy heavy metal could really depend on how you approach it. If you're looking for a cohesive story, the film may feel chaotic and inconsistent. But if you approach it as a snapshot of the late 1970s, early 1980s science fiction culture, and one of the earliest large-scale experiments in adult animation, it becomes something much more interesting. A historical artifact from a moment when artists and filmmakers were actively trying to redefine what animation could be. Welcome to the episode, everybody. I am pretty excited to, again, be bucking a little bit of format as we go into season 3. We've changed it a little, and we've put our extra trivia always will come out on the first 2 weeks after our episode comes out. So if there's something we don't cover in today's episode, tell me about it, and we'll make sure to cover it in the next mini episode of trivia. But we're also going to have somebody on has already seen this movie, and I've already seen this movie. We are going to talk specifically to you, the audience, because I feel like not enough people have seen the 1981 classic anthology, Heavy Metal. And I could think of no one better to bring on than Brett Kelley. Brett?
Yay! Hey, thank you so much, KT. Appreciate it. I'm very excited as
Yeah,
well. Yeah.
yeah. No, this is for people who don't know you. They probably don't know how good of a fit it is to have you on as a guest to talk about something that is both animated and about heavy metal music.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Definitely a lot of Venn diagrams closing in on each other on this one in the best possible way.
Mm-hmm.
From art style to storytelling to the fact that it's an animated movie that's based off of a comic book, which I know a lot of the history, which we can get into if we want. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of different stuff that's going to be fun to talk about. I think I was joking in the preamble that I was like, this is pretty much going to be like the "Hear Me Out" episode for a movie that it's a movie in my humble opinion is something that often gets overlooked or taken for granted, but it's also I feel like I'm going to have to do a little bit of like yeah like hang tight, hang through X, Y, and Z like. It is a product
Mm-hmm.
of the '80s and the late '70s and all that fun
Mm-hmm.
stuff. So, but we'll get into it later. But yeah.
Yeah. I think for anyone who's unfamiliar with the movie that we're talking about, weird way to come into a podcast, but welcome. Uh, we're talking about a totally animated movie from 1981 that, if you took a look at just perhaps the cover of, I think you could make some assumptions about what the whole movie is. And I know that it gets referenced in other things, like it gets referenced in South Park in certain ways as to be like really derivative to it being just purient. And it has its moments of purience, but it is not just that. And I think so let's just start our conversation with, why do you think people might not have seen this movie or be avoiding this movie? My thought is the sexuality that they assume is there.
Yeah. It is definitely one of those things where like I had a couple different words of being like at the time it pushed a lot of boundaries because the movie was based off of the magazine of the same name, Heavy Metal magazine, which has its own cool little history. Like to give you another weird insight, Heavy Metal the movie, which is based off of Heavy Metal magazine, Heavy Metal magazine was only began publishing in 1977, so for 4 years. So Heavy Metal magazine was out in publication for 4 years before the movie got made, which is, I mean, nowadays where you're like, if you want to make a movie based off of a book or anything literary, it has to be out for like multiple generations and it has to sell a billion copies or whatever. So to know that, like, it's definitely a fascinating bit that this movie kind of came out when it did in such a quick succession from the publication that inspired its creation, pretty much.
Oh, yeah, I definitely think it's interesting to think about how we need established IP right now, whereas what they were doing was reacting to how incredibly popular this magazine became in such a short span of time. We've got a director that you wouldn't expect. This is Ivan Reitman, buys the rights for heavy metal to do this. And if you're not familiar with heavy metal, it's pretty much, it doesn't seem like it's a huge leap from the structure of the magazine to make the movie that we wind up with, because Heavy Metal Magazine isn't just like, hey, here's a band, hey, this is just about music, say like some of the more contemporary music magazines or Spin. It had a lot of stories in it. It had art that was featured in it. It had so many things. And that's what this movie is responding to. It's trying to create a narrative that felt like reading the magazine.
Yeah. And actually, even to kind of add on to what you're saying on there, is that Heavy Metal magazine and the movie is actually Canadian based. It was Canadian production. And
Mm-hmm.
Ivan Reitman and Leonard Mogul, who owned National Lampoon magazine, are actually the ones that were responsible for acquiring the rights to making Heavy Metal the movie, because National Lampoon bought the rights for Heavy Metal, the North American version, because Heavy Metal is technically the English translated version from a French magazine, basically translating European illustrations and stuff like that. It was kind of the West's kind of like sneaky under like underground kind of scene for risque comic books and sequential art, because the Comics Code Authority, I think, was still very much in force during this time. So like a lot of horror comic books, a lot of those things, they were still kind of being limited because of the Comics Code Authority. But in Europe, nobody knows anybody, nobody cares about that. You can draw whatever you want. So Metal Hurlant was the actual name of the French predecessor, which roughly translates to howling metal or screaming metal, depending on who you talk to. So even though heavy metal kind of became more inspired by music in North America, in Europe it literally kind of was just kind of like a rough name translation. So, which is also why, like, not to bounce around too much, but which is also why in the heavy metal movie soundtrack, I mean, you do have some classics. You do have like Black Sabbath, but you also have music like Cheap Trick and Blue Oyster Cult and Grand Funk Railroad and bands that you would not necessarily consider metal. However, though, like the biggest chunks and the biggest pieces of the story do feature heavy metal music.
Yeah, I think that that's another key reason why people probably have avoided this movie. You think you're not a fan of heavy metal music. Why would I watch a movie called Heavy Metal that is based on heavy metal music from the 80s? Maybe that's not my bailiwick. I can't tell you how bad of an idea that is to start with, because this is one of the few interesting animations where they had the soundtrack picked for the scenes before they began their animation, which we also know Akira did. And when you animate to music, wow, some pretty fucking cool shit winds up happening. So you might not like this music to just sit down and listen to in your car, but we're giving you visuals. We're you might not like cilantro, but if you have it in this dish, it might kind of situation happening here. If you truly hate heavy metal music, obviously this is not for you, but I don't know, watch it on mute because it's still fucking gorgeous. And I did want to say about like Black Sabbath's inclusion in here is so interesting because I forgot that that was at the point in time in which Ozzy was in rehab, and so the singer is actually Dio, Ronnie James. So like in the song Mob Rules, like, oh, that's so cool. It sounds so interesting to get these like exact little flashpoints in music history as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's we'll get to which scene that's on because I'm jumping ahead of myself. But we're framing right now, just in the first like 15 minutes that we're going to talk before we jump into nitty gritty, things that might have made you avoid the movie. And I think music is a great point as well. And then just not having any touchstone for the magazine itself and why that would be cool or interesting. You had said that National Lampoon, that is so interesting. I did not know that, but that makes absolute sense because in one of the vignettes, Douglas Kenny is one of the voices for just one line. Like, that's how they got him, and that's why so many SCTV cast members are on here. And
Yeah.
okay,
John Candy, Eugene Levy, and Harold Ramis all voice characters on this, and it's because it's a Canadian production. So, yeah, a lot of which is why there's surprisingly a couple moments even rewatching now in 2026 that are quite humorous. There is some humor in some of these scenes. I would also say that for anyone who's an animation, not to try and throw another pitch on top of the pitch that is this episode, but
we're putting hats on hats.
yeah, sure. But I guess a good way to phrase that, like, heavy metal is, if you like alternative and kind of obscure animation, this is really interesting. Also, the just trying to think of, like, it's kind of like a legacy, how like Blade Runner, how, like, everyone who really likes movies is like, oh, you need to watch Blade Runner, yeah, and then you have to kind of do the caveats of being like, oh yeah, it's a foundation movie, it's the first of its kind, it did this, and then, Shoulders of Giants. I feel like heavy metal very much so is one of those examples, because it kind of rubs elbows with, like, Ralph Bakshi's type of stuff, back around the same time as well. So,
Yes.
but because of the fact that it's done with zero autobiographical content, excuse me, and also leans heavy into the Star Wars sci-fi, which of course had just been perking up in
Yeah.
these years, you can see the influence and the natural gravitation towards those themes in this movie. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I think that it's important to want to come to this to enjoy different kinds of animation, because in a double-edged sword sort of way, every scene is every vignette is animated by different studios. Like a bunch of them came together to do different portions, but there are different studios really involved in the majority of different vignettes, and so that gives you a different feel, which is both great and bad. Which means to say, if you don't like what you're watching in one segment, wait 10 minutes, it will change its style again, which is also for us delicious, because you're like, oh, more, give me more. I want to see it all. But for some people, it can feel like, oh, why did they change from that really cool style to this style? And
Yeah,
it's
tonal
you know, it's a
whiplash and
mixed
whatnot.
bag.
Yeah.
Yeah, but most people have such short attention spans. This should be perfect for now.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, one of the cool things about the fact is that this movie took 3 years to produce. So for an animated feature for a 90-minute, pretty good. But it's because you had at least five different segments. Technically nine if you count one of the segments is an overarching arc of the story of the Lochnar, which we'll get into later.
Mhm.
The five, but basically five teams all worked separately on each one to combine it together, which helped with its production time.
Yeah, I think this is, to me, it's both makes sense why it happened at this exact time, but it is still on paper pretty risky. Like, yes, the magazine is very popular right now. Heavy metal music is very popular right now. We've got the National Lampoon is very popular right now. These actors are very popular right now. But like, it was a $10 million budget in 81 for an animated film. That's huge.
Yes.
It's also an animated film that's rated R and was never intended to not be rated R. So what, you're making an adult animation before they really even want people are saying that this, you kind of have to be hoping that this does very well on VHS, and even still
Mm.
we're talking at like VHS is still kind of new.
Yeah, true. Very true. Yeah. And it's also one of those things where the property, the IP of itself is that like is kind of like a point to make is that like I think heavy metal, because it did have a cult following, that it had like clearly because Ivan Reitman and Leonard Mogul have they've already they'd already been working on like what Meatballs, Animal House, Ghostbusters, and Stripes. Like I think those are films that Ivan Reitman had been producing at the time. I think it was one of those things where like because of the connection with National Lampoon, because back in the day National Lampoon had so many different things to write out and put out there. It only made sense because they also had this funny little magazine that they were getting from Europe that they were translating and distributing to North America and whatnot. So I think it kind of made sense in their business plan to be like, well, let's throw it out there and then let's see what happens. Which I think some of my favorite stuff comes from that, where it's just kind of like it's on a lark.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Like Eon Flux or the Max or
mm-hmm.
listen to any of the other previous my previous two guest spots to if you want to learn more about my my laundry list of preferences. But yeah, in this particular case, my favorite animation is the weird plucked from the ether type of stuff. And technically, because like there were so many good artists that were featured in heavy metal or Metal Hurlant on its way over as it was translated from French to English, heavy metal does also keep that, because heavy metal magazine is pretty much the same thing as an issue of a heavy metal magazine. The heavy metal, the movie, I should say. They're one and the same
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the magazine is an anthology magazine. You have ongoing stories or you'll have one-off stories, and which is really cool. So the movie actually did a really good job of capturing that energy at the time. And yes, of course, there's a lot of gratuitous violence and imagery, and
Mm-hmm.
provided content that wasn't so readily available at your fingertips as it is in 2026. So it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
one of those things where I like to call it the curse of the pubescent teenager, which we can get into later. But it's kind of like the heavy metal is almost too successful for its own. Like the stigma around it has been a double edged sword.
Yeah.
It's been the thing that's garnished its largest audience, but is also put off the largest audience in turn as well, because like we said, there's a lot of gratuitous nudity, violence, and especially
Mm-hmm.
by today's standards, there's a lot of, you know, misogyny and a lot of stories that's kind of like a lot of fridge. That's a comic book term. Fridge is basically like utilizing like harming a female character for the sake of empowering another character, typically male, which
Yeah,
happens
like
a lot in comics.
our hero would want to save the world until we kill his girlfriend, who we
Yeah,
only introduced to kill.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I'm
I
not being.
think
Yeah,
that's probably the last thing in our conversation about like why people
sure.
might be hesitant
Yeah,
is the difference between, and we talked about this in There Will Be Blood, watching a movie with the idea of watching it as an audience member now or an audience member then. This movie, when it came out, was supposed to be subversive. It was supposed
mm,
to be overly sexualized. It was supposed to be sensational if you were 13, um, to get all of that. So if you're watching it now and you're like, uh, that is a bit of the intent, to be on the nose about it. I'm not sure how much they intended to be so misogynistic at certain points. I think that might have just been culture at the time, especially when you're talking about this. But it is very written from a men's point of view, which is
mm.
weird because I don't entirely feel like Heavy Metal Magazine ever felt gendered, and this movie feels a little gendered.
Sure. Well,
Although
it's also
I'll
yeah. No, no,
argue
go
that
ahead.
I'll argue the last one maybe less so, but we
I
haven't
was gonna
gotten there
say,
yet.
yeah,
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 right, right. That
exactly.
one
We, yeah, we
saves
can
it
get to that.
so much.
It does,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because I was going to say, like, because for all of its faults, there are pluses and minuses to what you're watching. And the
Mm-hmm.
fact is that
Mm-hmm.
there is a very ambitious third act, which introduces a character that has stood the test of time in terms of independent culture and the way that they've
Mm-hmm.
written it in such a way. And, like,
Mm.
I don't know where we want to go, but, like, it's actually because I have a lot of personal information about just heavy metal, the publication as well, that
Mm-hmm.
can also kind of, that we can talk about at some point if you're interested. If not, that's fine too. But like, there's just a lot of really interesting stuff with how heavy metal, like, because like I said, it's a French magazine where nudity is kind of, it's not as big of a deal, or at least not culturally. It was not as big of a deal in France, as it is in the
Mm-hmm. Of
states.
course. Yeah.
To a degree, obviously, with still North American creators doing their own material and interpretations of whatnot. But yeah, and also, yeah, I was gonna say, like, yeah, just saying that as a thing, being like, what, and even now in 2026, watching this now, you're like, this is, a lot of this is pretty tame compared to a lot of even mainstream pop culture live action stuff that's being put out right now these days. So it's just kind of, it is interesting to kind of see that arc of like how counterculture and pop culture kind of intersected and divided and whatnot, and to see where it came from is can also be really fun, and also just fascinating. But there are also really good
Yeah.
stories in there as well too. Like, for every, yeah, for every plus there is, for every minus there is a plus in there. I humbly think, but yeah, but it's not.
Yeah, that's going to be true of anything, I think, especially if we're talking about something that was aiming to be divisive or subversive in a time period that is like 40 years ago. That's going to be such a moment in culture, and then we're also talking about something that is from another culture, French culture, getting interpreted through us and then again through a second lens. So there's a lot to be put there, but let's just jump right in and start off with the very first scene we see, which is called Soft Landing.
Yes.
That's the intro scene where we've got the like Corvette rotoscoped going through space. This is actually written by Dan O'Bannon.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
And like, if you don't know who Dan O'Bannon is, you do. You just don't know. You know, because he wrote and did a lot of the creature stuff for all of the Aliens. The original Alien in
Yes.
'79. This is
Yep.
'81. You're doing a space movie. You want it to be scary, cool, sexy, creepy. We know a guy, and they get Dan O'Bannon. So like that made sense to me. And I
Yeah.
noticed there are two segments that I always have been like, those segments go hard. I love that. They're both
Yeah.
by Dan, so
Of
okay.
course.
Like you can start to, if you watch it enough times, see the threads of who did what.
Also another fun fact is that Heavy Metal Magazine. I mean, it's still currently running, although it's changed hands over the years. But back in the time, that actually makes sense that Dan O'Bannon was tagged on, because Heavy Metal also did a run of comics that were based on the Alien franchise. That were like, they were like little solo one-off projects that were kind of features of the year through Heavy Metal Magazine. So that makes sense that there would be a connection there. That's awesome.
That does make so much sense. Yeah. Yeah, I love to see like, oh, you can see the threads of, and like you were saying, this movie does wind up. What's interesting about watching it is you'll start to notice little things like, oh, that thing was a heavy metal reference in this other movie, because
Yeah.
it was probably the most subversive animated thing you could see at the time. So many directors and filmmakers definitely saw this if they were kids back then. I was talking to my husband, who was the first person to get me to watch this movie. I did not watch it as a kid because I assumed, like, I'm not a 13-year-old boy, and I had written it off. He was a 13-year-old boy, and he did talk about how, like, if you were smart, you could get a blank VHS. It would play on HBO on a like free HBO weekend, and you could tape it, and then you would be the king of your fucking school because anybody who wanted to watch it had to come out and hang with you. And he was like, the kids I hung out with to watch that movie.
I believe it. That's amazing. Yeah. Those are the old school
So
days.
yeah, I really like this scene. I really think it works well. I think it establishes kind of the idea of what we're going into here without being like, it doesn't really have a narrative, it doesn't really have lines, it doesn't really have dialogue, that, but you're like instantly like, oh, this is cool. I like rotoscoping so much that I might be biased as well.
It also, I mean, it definitely also has that echo of like MTV, like early MTV, where it's just kind
Well,
of like,
MTV even
yeah.
a thing yet? Question
That's a
mark.
that's a good question. Actually, that is a really good question. I'm not
I think
sure.
that's later. We'll have to
Yeah,
just,
because
our crack team is looking.
yeah.
I want to say 85. Oh, August 1st, 1981.
Hey, there we
So
go.
the
Wow.
same year. The
Yeah,
same year.
that's wild. Yeah, because the only reason that made me think that is like, oh, right, because MTV always had the astronaut as kind of like as like one of their mainstay logos. So of course you have like this space opera of like, oh, you have like this this really fancy car in space and whatnot. But yeah, I didn't realize that they were, yeah, hand in hand on that one.
It feels like culture is reaching an exact point in time where we're like, I would love to see something visual along with this music. And MTV and heavy metal were like, so hold on, we've got you,
Right.
my friends. Very
And actually,
cool.
yeah,
You're right. It does feel so MTV. Like that could be the opening to a television show for MTV.
that's fun. Oh, for everyone
Mm.
listening, MTV used to be his channel on called Music Television, where you would play where they used to play music videos, and believe it or not, music videos used to be a real big deal for a while.
Yeah, but believe it or not, yeah. Um, God, I mean, it only died this year.
Yeah.
As an artist, have you ever done any rotoscoping, and how do you feel? I feel like rotoscoping is a great tool for creating some real great realism in animation. It's not technically tracing, but I guess some people could think of it as cheating.
I I don't engage with rotoscoping too much just because I normally deal with static. Most of my, like almost all of my work deals with static imagery. But rotoscoping can be helpful in certain ways. The way that I would say the closest that I've ever gotten to using it would be for like rotoscoping, or at least using that technique to kind of fill in backgrounds, or if I need to do like a
Mhm.
one-to-one replication of like of a building, or at least do like an interpretation of laying something down. Like I've definitely done that, but otherwise rotoscoping isn't necessarily one of the things that I necessarily like doing. I've seen it, but I do enjoy it when it's done really well, like Scanner Darkly, like I was a big fan of.
We
I
covered
also
that
know
on
that.
this show too.
Heck
Yeah.
yeah, and I know Ralph Bakshi used quite a lot of it to help him with production on a lot of his films, including the Lord of the Rings adaptation
Hmm.
he'd put out.
Hmm.
But yeah, so like it definitely has its place for sure.
I love that trivia bit about how they just animated the guy who fell because he tripped over his scabbard
Yeah,
in Bocce's Lord of the. I just, well, you draw literally what you see, and he fell, so leave it in.
yeah, yeah. And you know for a fact that those people were working 15-hour days, so they were just like, oh man, I was just stuck on autopilot. Oops.
Oops. Um, I like the level of realism that it gives to certain things, and sometimes it keeps proportions in line in a way that I find are fascinating, which is ironic because this movie both hits proportions in stunning ways and does not hit proportions in other ways.
Yeah.
So like, okay.
Yeah.
And this segment is only like a really short segment. I think it's only a couple 5 minutes. So
Yeah.
won't get
But for
stuck
an
on it
intro,
too
it's pretty.
hard.
Yeah, for an intro, it's still pretty beefy, but it really does. But it's doing what it does to kind of really. Yeah, it's a very engaging intro, and the 5 minutes does not feel like 5 minutes when you watch it.
No, and if you're interested in animation, you're going to get right out the gate as soon as we start. You're going to see
Hmm.
rotoscoping as a technique. You're also going to see they did they did practical optical composing for the Lochnar glow. So instead of
Yes.
like digitizing that in, that is practical, which is always cool to see because it's very effective. The Lochnar grows. So something that I had read, because the Lochnar, if you don't know what the Lochnar is, it's this like evil glowing orb that connects all of the stories that are in the anthology. The Lochnar wasn't originally what they thought that they were going to use, because that's the one thing that isn't from any heavy metal. It's fully made up for this movie. They had at one point thought maybe they'd make it like an embodied human of evil. Did you hear any of this stuff?
I actually haven't. No, I know that Lochnar, like it's supposed to be obviously, as you mentioned, it's supposed to be like the through line through all the different segments, and it's referred to as the sum of all evils: violence,
Mm-hmm.
anger, corruption, sex, violence. Kind of a little bit more a ham-fisted way of being like, these are all the things that we're going to be covering in this movie, and here's how we're going to showcase them and whatnot.
It's
But
like the
I haven't heard.
MacGuffin.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. Yeah, but I have not. I have not heard. I haven't seen any. I didn't come across any tidbits of knowledge on that. That's awesome, though.
Mm-hmm.
Why? What did you? Why? What were they planning on leaning towards instead of the?
They wanted it to be a whole character, like a person, because we
Okay.
do hear the Lochnar talk. So as we move into the next scene, the Grimaldi scene,
Yeah.
where we have the little girl in the house and the orb um, coming to frighten her, and kind of introducing the concept of like, I'm going to tell you these stories about my existence in time and space when I have corrupted and made horrible things happen, and I am going to corrupt and kill you. And it's so great. The person speaking is, I think, Don Frax, who
Yes.
is an SCTV actor, but he's doing a great Orson Welles, in my opinion,
Yeah.
in this scene. So it has a like sincere gravitas where you're like, this is a
Hmm.
fucking killer. So we have the scene, we have the Lochnar, we have the girl. It's glowing. We've established that it's kind of like an evil MacGuffin thing, and that people are searching for it throughout history. And there are some of these scenes, because we do come back to this little girl as we bump in between certain vignettes, where the light is glowing on her face and she's so scared. It really made me think of the glowing suitcase in Pulp Fiction.
Yeah. Yeah. For
And
sure.
like that fucks everybody up to get it. Like everybody wants it, but like, do you really want it?
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things. Yes, I completely agree, and it is. And man, and even watching it now, like they did such a good job animating the face and the reaction that like they really contort it, and it's a really intense scene that is carried throughout the movie as it returns and as the story keeps being unfolded. And it's just a very effective method of animation of getting that of having that kind of intensity for sure. I can't even think of any other like not MacGuffinish, but stuff that's like trying to think of like the glow and the effect of staring into it. I mean, it's obviously very much the idea of it's a very interesting interpretation of humans' exposure to whatever vessel that is meant to say for corruption or power or the shadow self or whatever you want to call it. But it is a really interesting and compelling way of conveying that for sure. I'm curious as to what it would be like if they made it as a person. I feel like it might have actually. I think making it a person might have actually would have taken away from the sci-fi elements of it a little bit. I think, and probably would have lent it way more into the creepy, like the more creepier, like this man vapor, this man like coming into this girl's house and then accosting her in a hallway feels that would be a lot. That'd be a lot to have to kind of keep going back and forth into. You'd be like, I don't. That would be. I feel like that would be a lot for me as a viewer. I'd be like,
Yeah.
I don't care about what's happening. Like, get the girl out of there. Like,
Yeah, it makes it less real to give him corporeal form. I get it because he's got dialogue, you would think. Plus,
yeah,
you just don't have to animate it if it's an orb. That's
yeah.
great.
The
But also,
budget, yeah,
we're thinking about this kind of H.P. Lovecraft mouth of madness, and I don't feel like there's two things there where I don't think it should be gendered in any way because it is true evil chaos. So to make it
yes,
a man going after a little girl, our brains will get stuck on that. It's
yeah,
evil going off after like what is personified goodness, like children are pure and all that stuff.
yeah.
So I do think that they wound up at the better place. I'm just surprised that they ever wanted it to be a dude. That wouldn't have
Mm,
worked for me, in my opinion.
yeah. No, agreed on that.
Yeah.
The
So
Lochnar.
the Lochnar kind of introduces us to the whole concept that we're gonna be listening to a couple of stories, and then we
This is an
launch into
anthology story. I hope you brought your popcorn.
exactly. We jump right into what would be the first story, even though we're already two stories in. So this
Yeah.
might be called the first story, but it's actually the third story, Harry Canyon. And if that doesn't give you, obviously that's meant to be a joke. Why would
Mm-hmm.
they name the character Harry Canyon if you don't get exactly what you get?
Mm-hmm.
16 minutes long. This is actually my least favorite of all the vignettes.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I can understand why.
It's the most misogynistic of them all, and I think like obviously it's set like a detective noir. It's supposed to be very much like you had mentioned this. It feels Fifth Elementy, which I do love Fifth Element, but the character of Harry is just so unforgivably shitty that I
Mm,
have difficulty wanting for him to succeed or caring about what happens to him.
sure. Yeah. No. There. Yeah. That is. Yeah. And I guess you want. I guess you could argue that that story does a good job of just showing how the Lochnar is brings out the worst in people and kind of like everyone there sucks.
Yeah.
Like it's supposed to be
Mhm.
this hard boiled cyberpunk noir version, but I also do believe that there are elements. Not even mean to make that pun. There are elements of this that I do believe were later on inspired in the creation of the Fifth Element film, which, as you know, is a French in origin, and I believe I forgot the director. Was it Jean-Luc Besson? No, was it?
I thought it was.
Sorry, I know that not that.
No.
I should have written that down. I was too busy counting,
It
assessing
is
my.
Besson. Yeah, it's
Oh,
Besson.
okay, cool. Wow. All right.
Yeah.
But yeah, but Luc Besson, did not credit heavy metal directly.
Mm.
Obviously was inspired by this type. You could see the seeds planted in which it's a taxi cab driver and then a woman in white and carries her around and then
She's
they're
a
looking for
redhead.
this. Yes, yeah, yes, exactly. And you're kind of seeing the engaging with the world, and there's aliens and all that stuff. So
Yeah.
all that stuff is definitely introduced in the Harry Canyon segment. But I also agree is that it's definitely one of the more gratuitous of the segments for sure. In terms, and definitely the ones where you're like, oh yeah, nobody. In Reddit terms, everyone's the asshole here.
Yeah, you're winning me over though by pointing out how influential it is for Besson and how that kind of sets up that structure. Where like,
Yeah,
yeah, they're all kind of shitty. Even the girl is pretty shitty to begin with, and how she winds up handling it, where it all goes in the end. But yeah, that's really, really fascinating. I have a better appreciation for it now too. I do also know that they rotoscoped the backgrounds from real pictures of New York City, and so that's why it has this like real gritty authenticity, even though it
yeah,
is in space. So it's a space cabbie, it's future cabbie, but it still feels like dirty 1970s. And I was like, how did they achieve that? Oh, they used real photos. Okay, okay.
yeah, yeah. That's true. That's awesome.
And the fifth element literally means quintessence that is
Yeah.
the next this beautiful heavenly thing. And if you think about the Lochnar is almost the antithesis of the fifth element. So it's like
Yeah.
Poussin wanted to do this story, but he's like, what if they were searching for something that would have be ultimate good?
Yeah. 100%. Totally.
Yep.
Heck yeah. I'm just trying to
Okay.
think.
I've come back around. And for the cast on this one, we have John Candy plays the desk sergeant. Candy's in a bunch of different stuff in here. And
Yeah.
I know that he, if you watch the documentary about his life, he had difficulty saying no to work and often worked himself into the ground. I'm so sorry that that happened to him. I'm so glad he still chose to do stuff like this because he really brought it, makes so much of this movie so wonderful. Just
Well, yeah.
small roles, really wonderful. Joe
Hmm.
Flaherty is also in here from Messy TV. Yeah, really good stuff.
Hmm. No, agreed. And also
And
a big thing. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was going to say, and Richard Romanus played Harry, the main voice. I did not recognize him, but he worked on other stuff by Bocce. He did the film Wizards, which I did watch
Yeah.
recently. It's
Yep.
animation is way better than the story. And he was also in Mean Streets, but it's like, oh, we were just talking about there's more
Yeah.
crossover.
Oh yeah. And Wizards has the best single ending ever.
Touche.
I mean, in terms of just not to spoil anything, but it is just a very funny. It is a very hilarious ending. That movie is very strange. In the best
Yeah.
way. But it's also and also even to kind of help button up the Harry Canyon bit is that like it is also the heavy metal's animation style was heavily influenced with heavy metal and Metal Hurlant because a lot of these segments are based off of illustrations or inspired by certain animation styles that were converted from the story. So, like, which is actually really cool, and we'll definitely get more into it when we kind of get into the others. But yeah, like that, it's always really cool seeing that.
Well, this one is based on, and I had to look this up, so I don't know this off the. It says it's based on Richard Corbin's airbrush styles.
Yes.
That
Yep.
all right?
Yes. That makes perfect sense. Yeah, I was trying to find a lot of that. I was struggling to find a little bit more of like the production
My
side
notes.
of the notes, unfortunately. But yeah, Richard Corbin. That sounds about right. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And it's dirty and it's real and it's grounded, even though it's space. And it's interesting, but like, I really had a lot of problems with the like, how can you get every building correct, everything so perfectly? And this woman, the way her boobs move in space and the size of them relative to her head, it's just
Yeah.
like, I don't know how her back isn't broken in half. And also, that, I guess, no gravity from the middle part of your torso. So like
Yeah.
it's really shot from a male gaze that at points, even acknowledging that I knew I was going to get that, I was like, for the love of fucking Christ, guy.
Yeah. Well, I think. Well, also, I think with the Harry Canyon segment, it is actually it's supposed to be based in New York. It's just New York in the future, very like Fifth
Mm-hmm.
Element is,
Yeah,
which is why
exactly.
like you have like the floating taxis and whatnot and all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was actually I think the Twin Towers are actually still there in the animation.
I
I'm
mean,
gonna
it
have
would
to
make
go.
sense.
Yeah, because they were there. I think not to. Yeah, I'm
No, that's
pretty sure
good.
because I remember watching
If
it
they
being like yeah that yep
if they weren't there, they'd get in trouble. Somebody would be like, "What did heavy
yeah
metal know that we didn't know?"
yeah right. Oh goodness.
QAnon theory.
Yeah. Oh well, but yes, yes, future problems, and then also yeah, male gaze definitely is front and center on this one because it is very much like those pulp like the pulp stories, but just back when like these are one of the in the early days where it's all about just like slamming different genres together, or being like, oh man, we want to do noir, which is in the 50s, and that's forever ago. But we want to do like, what if this noir, but in like 2600,
Mm-hmm.
which we've been blessed and cursed simultaneously with seeing that done to death. But this was one of the earlier incarnations of it. Yeah, for
Yeah,
better
so
or worse.
you have to ask yourself, like, is this so cliche? And you're like, no, it established the
Yeah,
cliche.
yeah. It's
Because
the
you
thing you can blame for it.
because you can totally say like this is the future. They futurize the tech, but then like everybody's talking to each other like it's the 50s. We totally were like, nah, let's call them dames again. You're like, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
You could pretend we are, but we're not. That's fine. But
Yeah.
even still, I have to say, like, if I'm gonna have to take a pill of this in this movie, this is for me the most of it that you get, and it's right up front.
Yeah.
And then it
Gets out of the way.
gets better from here. If that's, your problem, you're like, okay, all right, fine, because it's still got a lot of good shit in here. It's just that one, mostly in the one sex scene where she's trying to take advantage of him anyway. Like, you're like, oh, okay, but like, it's only a couple seconds. All right, so moving on to the next vignette called Den. This one, like, I often forget this one is in the front. I often think of this one as closer to the last one because of how full it feels as a story. And because I did a lot of research on this is like really an old story from the magazine.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's definitely, it falls into the swords and sorcery, but in space, which was definitely the bread and butter of a lot of the stories that came out of Metal Hurlant and heavy metal at the time. But yeah, which is why it is so tonally different than a lot of the other segments. Or actually, you could even say it's remarkably close to the ending segment in terms of being like, oh yeah, like this is a completely different, fish out of water, and it kind of also does handle a lot of really interesting themes, like narratively speaking, where you're introducing these characters and they're experiencing these things, and like they're giving information that are like that touch base on like story arcs that I feel like you would see in modern storytelling today, thanks to like Rick and Morty and whatnot, or other fascinating exploratory expanding concepts where you're just like, not to break it down or spoil too much of it, but yeah, it's like there's this kid that's on Earth, goes to sleep or is affected by the Lochnar, I believe, and then is transported into this other world universe, not even sure where it is, and then meets a female, meets saves like a lady, and then she identifies her as like, oh yeah, no, I'm from somewhere else on Earth. So you're just kind of left with like, where are these people? Why is this happening? And that's really neat. And you have a lot of there's a lot of really interesting animation pieces in this as well that I do believe were also like just not one to one, but definitely were pulled from the story that it's from. I don't have that story in my collection, but yeah, that's Den. And also, I would say that I think having John Candy voice Den in this was the smartest move, because this one, for everything I just said, I would argue that it is definitely the funniest. It is the funniest, just straight up, from dialogue, line delivery, the accepting of the absurd, of the premises of it, and like I caught myself like genuinely chuckling once or twice, where I was like, "Oh wow, I didn't realize," and it's just because his line delivery is so good on a lot of
Oh
these
my God.
lines.
There is absolutely no way to not laugh. And this is our friend Jared's one line review for this movie. Is just a quote of this scene. I think he says, "Oh, she did have really nice eyes." Because there's this scene is so we can spoil it. Everybody who's listening to these podcasts should know exactly that we are going to talk
Sure.
about the whole movie.
Yeah, we're talking about a
So
45-year-old movie.
exactly. Sorry, but it is based on another Richard Corbin. It's called Den. It's a comic series that originally appeared in creepy and eerie magazines before later being in heavy metal itself.
I
And
did not know
so,
that. Okay,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
awesome.
there are some aspects of it that are specifically different that change some for me, and we'll get there in just a second. But we
Sure,
have
please.
this like young child who hasn't really experienced any level of sexuality, who gets put into this other universe that seems a little sexy because he meets
Mm.
this woman and she's really sexy looking. And so they both have avatars, really. It kind of feels like Avatar. This is another
Yeah.
world where we're going to pretend to embody these bodies that are not ours, that are better than ours. Like Den is suddenly really strong and he's trying to understand it's kind of like a great allegory for when puberty hits. So you're like, wow, I
Yes.
can suddenly do this and suddenly do that. And so the scene we're referencing is he comes upon the female character and she is nude and the proportions are better than the Harry Canyon, but we're still dealing with a lot of, you could get a whole 6 kids through college if you were a chiropractor in the heavy metal universe.
Yeah. Yep.
And she's sitting there totally nude, and her giant boobs are like 70% of the frame we have just seen, and it cuts back to dead, and Harry and John Candy gives this perfect delivery of, she has such beautiful eyes. You're like,
Yeah. the yeah, the line that always gets me too. He's like, I don't want to be stuck around here hanging with my dork hanging out. I'm like, wow,
yes,
that's
because he's
okay.
nude the whole time.
Yeah, for the vast majority for sure. Or if he's not, he's in a loincloth. Yeah, like it's very, which is awesome in terms of like just such an awesome line that I'm like, this is hilarious. Yeah, because I'm also trying to think of like, I should look into that Den story because I don't know enough about it, but it also does fall into the same time of like, Conan the Barbarian, where you have like this fantasy otherworld type of thing happening, and which is very much in the same ballpark as of these stories that are being told for sure. Like very Lovecraftian in that way, where they come upon a cult sacrifice and you're not exactly sure what's going on, and then does a deal with this other person that's just there's not a lot. It's a prime example of you. It kind of tags you along, and you aren't meant to understand much of it, but you just get to you get to hang on for the ride and see how the story unfolds without too much explanation as to the who, what, where, and why, which is also very much in cosmic horror and general like that whole stuff as well. So yeah,
Yeah, I I also want to shout out the actor who played, I guess it's the king of Neverwhere in this particular scene. When he
yeah,
gets it, he's like fighting that guy who's like really effeminate and kind of like,
yes,
that's again Don Frax. Like his
hmm
performance there just sells it for me. I don't know how you feel about the
oh for
king in
sure,
that particular, like his God, the one line when he's fighting with the queen over the Lochnar, and he goes, "It's my Lochnar, you stupid bitch." Like
yeah,
the two of them, like they're like fighting like this. No, no, it's my Lochnar. It's my Lochnar, you stupid bitch. It's literally the way the line is delivered, and there's
yeah,
something about that like kills me every. Like I will sometimes be fighting with the dog to get something out of its mouth and be like, "That's my Lochnar, you stupid bitch."
yeah. I forgot that. Yeah, that's great. That is a great bit in that for sure. Yeah,
This, I think I'm getting my scenes confused because later it's a different scene later on. I'm trying to remember the scene where they have the people come into the castle, but the little bald headed boy who opens up the door.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's a different vignette, right?
No, that isn't Den. That is where
Yeah.
because like part of the things that he gets roped into doing all these things, and the woman that he befriends gets kidnapped, and he's trying to get her back, but then the king's just like, oh, I'll let you have her, but you just need to do this for me instead. And then he has to like storm a castle and obtain a thing that he wanted, and then
Hmm.
during that process, he ends up seducing, I believe, the king's mother, the queen, I forget.
Yes, that's the queen who's
Yes,
fighting with. Yeah.
yeah, and so then that becomes an issue. Yes, but that sequence does happen in this story. Yeah, yeah. Because you're right. I don't know how long this segment is, but you get a lot of you get a lot of bang for your buck in this one for sure.
18 minutes. It is 18 minutes,
It does
which
not
is
feel like
long,
18.
except
Yeah,
that it's actually very good. So, like, again, this is why I think it's later on because I'm like, wow, it really sticks with you the most. I love, first of all, wow, that is an insane costume choice for the little boy who opens the door in your castle. That feels
yeah,
like a very Epstein Island kind of costume. Like totally bald, big huge sugar like circle lollipop blush, no pants, just a little diaper and the like tailcoat. I when they come in and they kill him and he falls on his side and there's the form dissolve of his
mhm,
silhouette into the next scene, which is like rocks and stuff.
yeah,
That is so good for me. That is, I love a good graphic match. There's the joke that
Oh
the
heck
best
yeah.
scene in cinema is when in The Godfather you see Brando's mustache turn into the top of a tree in Italy for a flashback. Like,
Yeah, that's
cinema.
right.
But that basically Heavy Metal did the exact same thing that fucking The Godfather did.
Yeah, transition game point on point. Makes sense. I mean, it just makes sense that it works anyway because we are dealing with the translation of a comic book or a graphic story. So you have the storyboards that will just visually, you get a lot of those visual cues just because of the nature of the medium.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you bring up something very interesting that I just read about in Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, which I'm sure
Yes.
you've read. If you're not, you're aware of it. Yes.
Oh yeah.
Fantastic, fantastic book. And as soon as you crack it
Award winning.
open, it starts to talk about the idea of how comic books are like storyboards, but
Mhm.
they have the ability to show all of these scenes at once. And so, like, instead of it being one single frame that I can show the audience, they can sometimes blow out of that frame. They can have you
Mhm.
looking at that frame and another and the next. And there's something about that that is inherently different about the medium and is why I think certain adaptations of comic books fail. They just can't be as good as the comic book because of the
Yes.
intangibility of only being allowed to see one frame at a time.
Yeah.
I would love to hear your comments on that.
Well, for sure. I mean, like I'm not just saying this because my beard is back in full, but like another comic book beard haver, Alan Moore, famously says that he hates when his work gets adapted into comics because he likes working in comics. He likes making comics that stay comics. He does not like it when the work translates because he feels like it dumbs down the medium. It removes the not accessibility, but it removes the essence of the story being told in a way that takes away from it. Because even though you can read a comic book and you can look at these static images and or bleed together and then become the story, but you're still engaging with it in the way that you see things in your mind's eye. So converting that into a consumable product that is then interpreted and then meshed and then gone through the creative process that Alan Moore has been exposed to, the flawed one in many ways. He just doesn't. It's just never worked for him, even from he's never. I don't think he's ever directly praised a single adaptation of his work. He didn't like League of the Extraordinary Gentlemen, From Hell, Watchmen, like subsequent and all that. Like, and generally, when he would make money off of those, he would actually give them to his artists. Generally speaking, because like he's already made enough money, and he's like he's definitely a divisive character in the sequential art world, unfortunately, because he's some people call him a pretentious, or he's high on his rock or whatever, but he just has a point about how he likes his medium being how he doesn't like it when people mess with his stuff because it removes that intimate the individual journey that reading a comic book can give you, just like reading a book. It's just it's just frustrating, and of course he just did a bunch of deals, which is why he still makes comics. He just makes it a point to make comics that no one will want to convert into anything. So he purposely puts in like horrific graphic violence, horrific nudity, just very very violent sexual content, graphic like occult stuff, like whatever, he'll throw that in there. Yeah, so that's what he does now. So that way he can at least, it's almost like obligatory. He's like, well, I got to put something in here so that way no studio will want to touch it. So that way I can still make my books, I can still make my fans happy, and then I can just be left alone. I know that's what we did with he had a comic book called Neonomicon that was very
Yeah.
much like that. It was all H.P. Lovecraft, and he also did a Lovecraft book. It was a 12-issue miniseries that was dedicated to the 105th anniversary of H.P. Lovecraft. I won't get into any of those, but like those are examples of the work that he makes now, which are all very much like out of left field. There's like, oh wow, there's no way anyone's gonna try and pay money to turn this into a movie. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of like that's how he's kind of safeguarded himself on that. But yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to
No, no.
ramble.
When people talk about Alan Moore, they often always talk about, and his name is kind of escaping me. It's not Grant Ellison.
Grant
It's
Morrison.
it's Grant Morrison. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm like, Grant
Yep.
Ellison is definitely not it because I love him so much. No, I
Yeah.
love both Moore and Morrison. I feel like they both are so great at making comics, so genuinely good storytellers, but every
Yeah.
once in a while you're listening to an interview and you're like, you're a little high in your own supply. You need to calm down. They're both a little pretentious, but also like when you live the life that they have lived, you've been done as dirty as Alan Moore has been done again and again, you're kind of
Hmm.
justified in being the way that you are. And also, I think they both think they're real wizards, so I don't really want to fuck with either of them. They may well be.
Actually, well, they technically, I think they could describe themselves as such, because they write spells. And what are spells? Writings on paper. What are writings on paper? Comics, money.
They write
If you want
stuff
to
on
get,
paper, and it makes images in your brain.
yeah, exactly. They make you feel things. They're able to transform. It might be in the most boring way possible, but it is still what they're doing. And also, fun fact: Grant Morrison actually was the editor. Did a guest spot as editor in chief on Heavy Metal back in 2020. Like the history of Heavy Metal magazine is so interesting because the history in 90 seconds or less, because I don't want
Let's do
to
it.
ramble too much, but yeah, 1977, the Heavy Metal proper gets bought by National Lampoon. The comics that have been active for like the last year in Europe get freighted over. They translate it. They re-put it out as Heavy Metal magazine. They do this until 1980. Metal Hurlant goes bankrupt, and then there's a bit of a break in production, and then the issue gets reconciled in 1981. So right now that's the first one. They were doing monthly, and then they dropped down to quarterly from 1985. So for like the first 9 years, they were a monthly magazine, and it is a monthly. It's not a comic. It's big, so that way bigger, better work, better offerings, and all that stuff. And it also set itself apart from the comic book stands in the United States.
Do you know the cost when it originally came out? How much an
That's a
issue
great
was?
question. I want to say it was like a couple. It was a couple bucks at least, if not probably more than that. My issues of Heavy Metal are not in this room. Sadly, I should have brought a couple, but I know that they were more. They were probably magazine pricing in the 80s. So because it was Heavy Metal magazine, so it was treated like a magazine, even though it's a sequential art and graphic art and whatnot. And then in 1992, Kevin Eastman buys the company for $500,000. So this was 2 years after the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles
Wait,
movie.
wait. Eastman,
Kevin Eastman,
like
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
okay. So, wow,
yeah,
sorry, you just said that. I was like, wait a minute, my brain is catching up. I'm
yeah,
like, I know that
yeah,
guy from our
yeah,
area. I know that
yeah.
guy.
Exactly. Up until 2020, Heavy Metal Magazine did their magazine fulfillment in Eastworks, which is in the basement of Eastworks. You could walk by it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You could walk like in the basement. It used to be where there used to be a little building right in the basement. It was right across the street from right across the way from where Prodigy Golf and where Prodigy is.
Yes.
Like the mini golf and gaming kind of community. That like across the way there used to be a huge space that was quartered out, and it had Heavy Metal on the sign up until 2020. Yeah. Um, but yeah, because like Kevin Eastman was a huge Heavy Metal fan when growing up and whatnot, which is so rad. And he, because he lived in the area for quite a while. And then that's where the Heavy Metal name got converted to Metal Mammoth Incorporated, and he ran it until 2014. So like pretty recently.
Yeah.
And then from there in 2014, he was still editor in chief until 2016. But there was like a really, it was like he there's a very weird, like he ended up selling, or he was he I don't know, he had a falling out basically with the company. I'm not sure how, but he ended up selling his shares, and he kind of went off and did his own thing. But he still remained as editor in chief for 2 years after that. But then it was sold to in 2014. It was then sold to a producer named David Boxenbaum, and then Jeff Krelitz under the name Heavy Metal Media LLC. And then it ran under that ownership until 2020. But then but up until then it was not handled particularly well for a while. And then it lasted. The first iteration of the magazine ran up until issue 300. So, and which concluded in 2021. And then there was a then like the company kind of shut down in 2022. Like there was cancellation, and then there was a shutdown, and then in July 2023 they did issue number 320, which was going to be the final issue in like the first volume of heavy metal in of the old school, and that was done through Whatnot Publishing. And then that was a really harrowing issue, little pun intended. That was a harrowing problem to get that done, because there was just a lot of issues dealing with, like, orders weren't being fulfilled, artists weren't being paid, vendors weren't being paid. So there was just a lot of distribution issues that nobody could figure out what was going on. And it really hurt the brand. And then recently, up in October of 2024, the heavy metal then got bought out by Heavy Metal International LLC, and now it is run by people that used to be involved in the comic, that used to be like editor and a couple other people, and now they're running it again. I think they're back. I think they're at like issue 5 or 6 now of like the new run. But when Kevin Eastman was available, they did a lot of really cool exploratory stuff where they would have guest editors come in, and so I think they had a lot of like heavy metal people come in. So I think Corey Taylor did one, but Grant Morrison was the editor in chief on a couple too, where he got to just select his favorite stories. Because one of the cool things about heavy metal too, as well, was that it also took. It was one of very few publications that you could just solicit. Like, well, if you send us something that we think is good and doesn't suck, we'll print it. We'll work with you. Like, we'll get you printed if you have a story that fits what we're looking for, which like nowadays is very hard. It's a very difficult thing to find, because everyone has a comic book to sell, and everyone has like their own versions, and it, I, so that is a really interesting facet of heavy metal magazine. But yeah, to bring it back to what we were talking about, Grant Morrison has a touch point with heavy metal. So yeah, which is
That
super fun.
makes so much sense, because I was trying to understand, and we know we're still in the middle of talking about Den, but we're gonna jump ahead for a second here to
Sure.
Heavy Metal 2000, which is the sequel
Yes.
to this movie that gets made in 2000, and is
Mm-hmm.
based on the comic series The Melting Pot by Kevin Eastman. And I couldn't understand why that would happen until you just gave me all this information.
Yeah, I think Kevin Eastman's wife was a major inspiration for a lot of the work that he did with them, because Tarna was a big mainstay character for the brand, and then Kevin Eastman had made, I can't remember what her name was. It was like Lady Toxic or something, or Atomic. I can't remember what it was, but it was basically like a version of Tarna, but it was based off of Kevin Eastman's wife at the time, I believe.
Was it
Julie Strain? Yes.
Julie Strain. I literally just clicked on. Yeah, I'm like Julie Strain.
You said you I heard you start saying it, and then that flipped the switch in my head. Yeah, Julie Strain. Yeah, that was her name. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And that's kind of like, yeah, which is also a bummer, because like Heavy Metal 2000, which is why a lot of people didn't like it, because it broke the format of the original Heavy Metal, if I remember correctly. Like, I think it was just supposed to be like a long continuous story,
it's
as opposed
based
to
on
the
that
anthology.
one story. Yes. Yeah. So it didn't feel like the sequel to it, and also like, why not just make it its own thing? Why not just call it? They were trying to buy on, and when you're buying on something that was like the first of its time and period for a time period, and you're doing it in 2000 when pornography exists on the internet, like it couldn't. We speak to a like time period necessity. I don't think you could make heavy metal right now and have it really land.
We can talk about that later, actually, because that talks more about the legacy of what heavy metal was and has become, and then what it's currently doing. Because as of right now, I mean, if you want to talk about like, well, we can talk about it later. I don't want to get us too far off if we're still recovering, still we're still kind of recounting the movie. I don't want to throw us astray too badly.
We'll put that in our final discussion conversation, since we normally ask, did you like the movie? And obviously we both fucking like the movie. So we'll answer that question instead at the end.
Okay,
but,
cool.
Just putting a bow on all of this, I think it's very interesting that one of my favorite scenes in the entire movie is the animated graphic match thing that happens in here, where I think that that's just so beautifully done. But
Yeah.
like, oh, that is the least comic. Like, you can't really do that with a comic, but it is almost a moment where you can see two images at once. And I'm like,
Yeah.
just like a comic book. That's why I love it the most. Like, oh,
Yeah.
okay,
Heck yeah.
okay. See what you're doing there. The one thing that the original story has differently than
Mm.
this story that I
Yes,
find
please.
makes me wonder, like, I keep going back and forth on it. I'm like, okay. The ages of the characters in the original story are different. So, and we get a little bit more first person from the woman as well, because there are these two people in this universe. And
Yeah.
so he's the age he's kind of supposed to be. I think he says he's 18, the animated movie that we're watching, probably for
Okay.
legal reasons. In
Yeah,
the
I was gonna say,
comic,
yeah.
he's closer to like the age you think he is, because he's 18 but he sounds like he's 13. He's
Yeah.
like that age in the original story, and the
Mhm.
woman is in her 80s.
Whoa. That's weird. Yeah. Okay.
You got to chalk it up to being like, it was France in the 80s, I guess. And there's a part of you that's like, at least the lady's older. And I don't like, obviously,
Mm.
they're both, 18, 20-year-old bodies, interacting in the movie. But
Yeah, yeah.
like, what is the implication of such a large age gap? And like, I
Mm.
wonder what the original intent of the author was there. But I'm also very
Yeah.
glad that they just kind of are like, no.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that was a good decision to be made to keeping your audience, at least part of your audience, in mind for that.
In mind. It does cut out some of the agency and the like three-dimensional character of the woman that you
Mm.
would get if you were actually reading this. So again, if we're speaking to the idea that like, wow, this movie really feels like it's for men. I don't know if the magazine is. The magazine was a lot broader in certain aspects of this.
In a way, yeah, like, yeah, it depends. Like, there was definitely, because once again with National Lampoon involved and stuff like that, there were stories ideally designed for everyone, but especially in North America, like, it very clearly was like the majority of the audience was predominantly male, younger, but they still did, But like I said, like, if you had a really cool story, like, there were plenty of stories in heavy metal that are not gratuitous in any way. There were just really interesting stories that explored dark fantasy, cyberpunk, just all the different types of subgenres of science fiction and fantasy and whatnot. So like there was definitely a mixed bag of whatever you'd have, but there would also definitely be, especially the earlier ones. The earlier issues were almost, or like, very, you could see that there was definitely like an awareness of being like, oh yeah, no, like, these are all just like all the funny papers, because there were definitely regular contributors to heavy metal that also would, that would get their comics published in Playboy, or or the other, you know guy magazine. So it would not be unfamiliar to see heavy metal on the same shelves as those types of publications as well, for sure, just because of like the appeal and the general audience at the time, for sure. But now heavy metal is much more, as the brand has grown, the brand definitely tries to branch out more towards all audiences. Sorry to
Yeah.
ramble on that.
No. I was gonna say, although when we talk about people who have written for Playboy or Penthouse or anything, like, we must also, like, comic artists. Maurice Sendak, very, very prolific writer for
Oh yeah.
Playboy, children's comic book artists. So like, we
Mm-hmm.
contain multitudes, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Actually, would be more creeped out by like a comic artist who only, as an adult human, was like, no, I'm really only about children's stuff and children's stories. I'm like, oh no, that's probably not
Right. Right.
great. But I think a great example of moving from something that's more sexualized to something that's more universal is the next segment called Captain Sternn. I really love this one. I think this one's great. It's based on another comic book that was serialized in heavy metal towards
Yep.
the late 70s. I think it was called Captain Sternn as well. So it was created by Bernie Wrightson and Richard Corbin. This is another Richard Corbin one. I love the idea that we get Eugene Levy in this piece voicing the really like sexy, cool captain. Like Eugene Levy, who always gets to you would think he would be more likely to voice Hannibal Fist.
Yes. Yeah, correct.
Meanwhile, Hanover Fist, did you recognize who voices Hanover Fist?
I actually not. I did not get to pair the names on that one. Who was it? Did Harold Ramis? No, no. It
For our
was who was it?
younger listeners, you will recognize that person as the voice of Squidward.
Oh no way! Heck yeah, that's
I have to
awesome.
get the exact. I forget his name.
That is
I think
amazing.
it's Doug. No, it's Rod,
Okay. Yep.
which is a name that I'm like, is that a real name or am I remembering that wrong?
Right, right.
Yes, Roger
But
Bumpus,
yeah,
known for voicing Squidward Tentacles. And I think that when you
yeah,
listen to Hanover Fist, you can see an early version of what winds up being the Squidward voice. So if you're a
yeah.
big SpongeBob SquarePants, at least watch this segment.
Sure. I also do feel like this segment also does give it like a Pulp Fiction-y vibe. It's very clearly you're getting a segment of a story and without the context, but you know something bad has happened and you know something bad is going to happen later. But you just get to have this nice little sliver of an intense exchange between a bunch of characters, which is really fun.
Mhm. Yeah, as I start to list off the things that Captain Stern has been accused of, like, holy shit. And he's like, wait a second, I've got an idea. You're like, what the fuck could possibly uh, be the idea?
I
And
have an ace in the hole. Like, what are you talking about?
I do love the idea that the conceit is a double play. Because, like,
Yes.
we see Hanover Fist turn into this insane giant monster and start going insane, and we think that that's the Lochnar that's done that to him, but the Lochnar's like, I don't know if the Lochnar could make Captain Stern any worse.
Yeah, yeah, right. Truly, like it's almost like the Lochnar was put in his position because it was going to get closer to Captain Stern to kind of help, you
Mm-hmm.
know, embolden him further to keep doing whatever he was doing that got him there. But yeah, it is such a fun's not the yeah, it's such an engaging scene in segment that's kind of there, and it does kind of help you be like, I really want to know what's going on, so like you kind of want to see if you can pick up the magazine and pick up the comics and see if you can follow along.
Yeah, I think that whenever you're seeing something that's been adapted from something else, you will always have a better experience if you go from the movie to the original source because it gets
Yeah.
wider, it gets better, it gets if you're gonna go from the original source to the movie, you're gonna lose stuff. It's gonna and so I
Hmm.
often say like, oh, is that based on a book? I'll wait till the whole thing comes out and then I'll read the book so that I can see a better version of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, this is just really fun. It's a very comedic one. It's also drawn a little bit more kind of childish. There's more rounded creatures, more chaos in the space station. So it's a nice kind of, I think, palette cleanser between Den and then the next piece, which is B-17, the other Dan O'Bannon piece.
Yeah.
Because Den is long and it's got a lot of character development and there's a lot going on, but Captain Stern is only 10 minutes and then B-17 is only 10 minutes and B-17 is no, there's no dialogue, right?
I don't think so. The only dialogue. I
But
mean,
yeah.
there's audible, like there is audio and but the dialogue is just screaming and shouting or like
Mhm.
minimal, like maybe someone shouting an order from the front of the plane to the back, or like screams of pain, or voices from like monsters and whatnot. But it's
Mhm.
very minimal, if at all.
Yeah, and this is really kind of horror graphic, and that's probably why I like it so much because it's really an interesting scene. Part of the reason why they were thinking about maybe making the Lochnar like physically manifest into something was this scene because they were like, "Oh, the zombies could be the Lochnar, like the mon," and then but they were like, "We don't need that. The zombies can just be zombies. Like, just
Yeah,
go ahead."
yeah, for
Even some
sure.
of the designs in this were recycled by Bannon from the original Alien. This like leftover stuff.
Oh no way! Heck yeah!
Yeah, yeah.
It's a really good piece, and also like this is one that it I didn't even realize, but when you say it out loud, it makes perfect sense that Dan O'Bannon was also involved in this one, because it literally goes back to the same to the same vibe and storytelling structures as the very beginning does. And yeah, and it honestly, it reads to me like such like Creepshow Twilight Zone vibes or energy in the best way. And like you said it was a 10-minute segment. That is also one where like it's just really good at filling the time, and it doesn't, it feels so much, just thinking back on it, feels so much longer in a good way, because there's just so much suspense and happening in that story.
Yeah, and like it really feels the most like a music video too, because we're really just relying on the music for that particular segment.
Yes.
Man, just checking my notes on this one because I was trying to find the music for every single scene to have it written down. And then I came into this like little bump where if you know stuff, like anytime stuff from MTV tried to come to DVD, like The State tried to come from being on TV to DVD, but it couldn't for a very long time because they needed to get licensing for all the individual songs. Because when you played it on MTV, they were allowed to use all the music, but you can't really do that.
Hmm.
So heavy
Yeah.
metal apparently, despite like being based on the music it was going to be set to, ran into some issues when they tried to put it on DVD. And so some of the original stuff is not what winds up later on. And so there's like, oh, yeah, that scene had this song when it was in the theater, but then it has this song when you watch it on. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting considering they were made to the exact music.
Yeah. No, that is that. I should have assumed that would, not that I assumed, but yeah, that's, I did not know that, but also I'm not surprised by it because music
Yeah.
industry.
So this one has Taken a Ride by Don Felder, the Eagles guitarist.
Hmm.
And that's on the soundtrack. But the it also has an Elmer Bernstein score. It's just like, huh, like an
Okay.
orchestral one linked to it.
Sure. Sure. Interesting.
Interesting stuff. And again, I just really like the idea that this is very like just image based and music based. We don't even really have that much dialogue.
Yeah.
So when we say that it's written by Dan O'Bannon, like the structure, let's kind of put it there. I just love how much you can accomplish with so little dialogue. It's another good wipe
Oh
in
yeah.
between the style of vignettes that you're getting, and it's pretty quick.
Totally. I was actually even thinking about that, where like, because I think in the Lochnar, when the Lochnar is describing itself to
Hmm.
the young protagonist, the young female, it self describes itself as like the source of like corruption, war, sex, and violence. I think are the things. I want to say
Hmm.
that those are the things that he used, and it makes me think of like, are those the keywords that were used as the vessels to drive the themes of all of these segments? Because we have B-17 as war, we have Captain Stern's corruption, and then Den and Harry Canyon obviously have sex and violence involved. So I don't know if that was like a key point or a direction, or if that, or just as a throwaway line to help encapsulate all the themes. But it just struck me it just struck me a lot, because you're like, you know, of course the Lochnar is the glue holding all this together. But I'm curious as to how much the dialogue in that infers or directed the usage of the segments and curated them accordingly. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a really interesting theory. I like that a lot. I'm trying to pull open the exact lines to see which evils it lists itself as, but
Mm.
I'll have to catch that as we get. I think it's like greed and hatred and violence and lust and
Yeah.
like those kinds of things and like corruption, but I'm not.
Yep.
I
Yeah.
love that
That just
idea though.
Yeah, because you know, it's one thing when you have the list off, you're like, well, that checks that one off. War, yep, B-17, you got it,
Hmm.
nailed it.
Even just most wars are fought over greed, so like boom, right there.
Yeah, oh yeah,
And then the next segment that we go into, So Beautiful and So Dangerous, is a great representation of like corruption. It starts with this whole government satire, and then winds
yeah,
up in a totally different
yeah,
location after that. Um,
yeah.
I
I would
love,
argue this is the silliest one of
yeah,
all of them.
yeah.
Yeah, and it reads more. I mean, and I would honestly say that this one also reads very much like that has like the strongest influence of non-American, if that makes sense, because
Mm-hmm.
it's like
Mm-hmm.
the alien designs, the alien characters in this, they look like, I had to double check like because there were a pair of alien characters that are in 2000 AD, which is a UK publication. I can't remember their names. I have one of them, but they were like, the story is very similar to a lot of these types of stories where like there are these characters that they travel through time and space and they futz with humankind and they do all this silly stuff and they do drugs and they party and it's like this whole weird kind of thing. And of course, it's in this silly spaceship that looks like a smiley face, and but it is very much like a space trucker kind of run amok type of deal, but like, and I know that it is very much like in the same vein as a lot of like some of the sillier stories that do appear in heavy metal as well. But yeah, I don't know I don't know who the the animator was that was, or the illustrator that the segment was based on, though, because it does, like I said, it does have like that, that comedy aspect to it for sure.
It is probably the most absurd. And to go from the
Mm.
like hyper realized, rotoscoped war segment to this definitely really feels like, yeah, this is pretty silly. A lot of critics say that this is the weakest segment, and I strongly disagree there. I know that it is silly and it's a big tonal change, but I still really like, you get Eugene Levy, you get Harold Ramis, you get John Candy kind of bouncing off each other. Does it feel like, do you dislike this segment?
It's not one of my favorites, but
Hmm.
I don't look at it from like a devalued point of view. Like it's fun. There's a lot of iconic, like, even though obviously Tarna is kind of like the main focal point on most of the promo materials for heavy metal because it's the sword and sorcery type of thing. But I also have seen plenty of heavy metal merch where it's literally just the spaceship, kind of, which shows just how much of like, I like it because of the tonal shift. Like, it's a nice little whiplash kind of thing going on.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's tricky. Like, yeah, like, I mean, I like it for what it is, but it's also because it also is like, it's probably the closest in terms of like what it's closest to in terms of like, I'm trying to think of some of the others, like, rock and roll, or like some of the other more mainstream like underground like animation that kind of came after it, in terms of being like, oh, this is like, this is kind of like a lampoonish type of thing. That's actually, yeah. I'll bring it back to like, this is that sequence is very National Lampoonish to me, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's
Mm.
silly or stupid. It is just a different take on a different type of content that heavy metal touches base with.
Was the artist that you were trying to think of Angus McKee?
Maybe Angus
That's
McKee,
Angus
possibly.
McKee is the person who did the design that So Beautiful and So Dangerous is based on.
Okay.
He did space vessels and a couple of different stuff from the late 1970s, heavy metals. So it could be, but the spaceship is so stylized, I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't a reference into that. It's ironic that there would be a reference, somebody would take that and use this in there, because the sequence
Mm.
where we're going through the like um, asteroid field in here, after they've taken the. My favorite line from the movie is, damn, that's some good Nyborg, or that's
Yeah.
good Nyborg. I think about that a lot. That's the cocaine that they smoke. They snort. That almost got cut by Columbia. And I'm like, really? You're going to draw the line there?
Okay.
Fine. The segment was actually supposed to be much longer too, so it does get cut down again. But when they're going through the asteroid field, if you're paying attention, you can freeze frame it, and tons of recognizable famous spaceships fly by. Like, you
Oh,
see the
okay.
Enterprise fly by, you'll see another, like, oh, if you're catching it, you're like, oh,
Awesome.
ha ha! So there's some fun Easter eggs that they stuck into there.
That's rad. I'll have to. Now I have to rewatch it to catch what I missed, because I was not clocking that when I was watching it. Another fun fact of Angus McKee, because you are right, he did do a lot of the character design. He also frequently collaborated with Dave Gibbons, who's also the artist that did Watchmen with
Of
Alan Moore's.
course.
Yeah, because he also did
That
work.
makes
Yeah, so he
sense.
also did work on 2000 AD. So yeah, neat.
I mean, I wonder if we're so, like, sometimes people will say to me, "Do you know so and so? They fence in New England, and New England is like multiple
Mm.
states." And I'll be like, "Yes, I do very much know them. This is the smallest sport ever." So like, I wonder if we're so surprised because we keep being like, and then, but it's like, yeah, because there was only like 50 of us doing it at the time, so we all knew each other.
Yeah, no, 100%. I guarantee you that's what it is. Well, it's also one of those things where like yeah, I think no, I don't need to expound. You're right.
I'm still impressed every time we find a connection back. It just feels like, because there's something about heavy metal that you could just throw away and you could say like, this is a stupid cartoon from the 80s that I don't need to watch. But once you start looking at it, you're like, shit, all of these people who bothered to be involved in this are people I really like. So there has to be a reason they got off the couch and made this. They didn't get paid a lot to do this. And they
Yeah.
risked it was kind of risque to do this. So why would they be
Yes.
why?
Well, I mean, well, I wasn't in any look. I wasn't in any of the rooms where these decisions were made. But I think the big hook on it was because of National Lampoon. National Lampoon, if you remember back in the day, like they made all those like really great celebrated movies that are beloved, and but they also they were also behind their creative powerhouse, and they were able to make a lot of stuff, and they were able to explore at the time. And one of the things that you can get away with, as long as you're using humor, is you can get away with a lot of gratuitous nudity, sexual awkwardness, and a lot of the same content that you would get away with that you would not be able to get away with if you were to just do it full, very straightforward or pointed. It was always kind of under with the wink and the nudge, which I think is what tickled them, because they're like, oh well, we can't, we can't, we can't. We can't have as much gratuitous nudity because we can't get we because then we're just going to get canned at the film at the movie theaters. But what if we
Mm-hmm.
animate it? That's our way of getting away with it. Like that, I think that is definitely a part. That definitely has to be a part of the angle, at least for 1981. If I were to put
Oh,
myself in those shoes.
and I also think the angle has got to be everybody wants sci-fi. We just saw how great Star Wars is doing. We just saw how great Alien does. What's the quickest, cheapest way to do sci-fi? Animated, let's be honest, because most of this shit is going to have to be practical. It'll be so much more believable right now as well. Even if you could have the money to do the CGI, it's like, what CGI? Stop animation and stuff like that. So,
Mm-hmm.
I think a great movie, this is a fictionalized movie about the founding of National Lampoon and all of this exact time period. A futile
Yes,
and stupid gesture.
I have heard of it, and I wanted to watch it, but I didn't because a comedian that I follow, Rick Glassman, he plays a young Harold Ramis in that movie, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Yeah,
which is
it's a
pretty
great
cool.
movie. It really does talk to what you're talking about right now with the idea that like how famous was National Lampoon when National Lampoon like, oh, you strap in, watch that movie. And then you'll see all the things that Doug Kenny did. So it wasn't just National Lampoon, it was all these other movies and all of the actors that were being involved and kind of recycled through all of these movies, and you start to see like, okay, if you're a big fan of all of that, you really should come check out heavy metal. It's kind of like, did you know the guys from SCTV and National Lampoon made an animated movie
Yeah, no, for
for
sure.
adults
Yeah.
too?
Yes, and that is actually I love that line of logic. That is a great way to also alternatively pitch it to someone that is not that looks at the title and is beleaguered by it or is not interested. Like
Hmm.
that is a great angle of presenting that for sure.
Nice. So yeah, I like So Dangerous and So Beautiful and So Dangerous, but I think a lot of the dialogue is very funny between
Yes.
Ramos and Levy. I also really think the dialogue between the woman and the robot played by John Candy, who does a great robot voice, I thought that is
Yeah.
very funny. For as much as like she is this big titted idiot, they're having a real conversation about the implications of sexual gratification for women using robotic devices. Does that even
Yeah.
count? And he wants to get married, and she's like, and the line that it lands on is also a very like of the time almost Catskill comedian line where she's like, fine, I'll marry you, but it better be a Jewish wedding. And you're like, zombies in the last one, but that's how we'll end this one.
Yeah. That's great. Oh, so fun.
And that brings us to what is the last vignette, but not the last scene, because we still go
Yeah.
back to the Grimaldi, but we got here to Tarna. And if you've made it, if you're watching the movie and you've made it to this point, and you have any question about continuing, for the love of sweet Jesus, keep continuing, because this is the best scene in the whole movie, in my opinion, with regards to the plot, the animation, the music, everything coming together to what makes like is a really realized and full story.
Yeah. No, for sure.
This was definitely inspired by Mobius. So let's talk a little bit about Mobius. What
Yeah.
do you know about him?
Sure. I mean, I don't know a lot about Mobius. Also known, but like his actual name is Jean Giraud. But like Mobius is a widely celebrated illustrator, prolific illustrator as well. Lived a very long life, produced a lot of really interesting work that inspired generations of artists. But like, and he has his own illustrations and stories that were that were translated from Metal Hurlant over to heavy metal. His style is much more celebrated for his line economy. It's a graphic style, but there's a lot of detail. His character design, his world design were such incremental parts of what he created. Like it's one of those things. Like if you look at a Mobius drawing, you're gonna go right, that guy, because it's just his stuff is so pervasive throughout. And like inspired generations of artists. I can say safely without pause.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so it's like I don't know much about his personal career in terms of tragically. I don't know too much about him personally or his personal works. I do have a couple. I do have a couple of pieces that he's a couple issues and stories that he's written because I Metal Hurlant actually recently relaunched. So and they did a Kickstarter. I backed that, so I was able to get the first year of Metal Hurlant, which has a bunch of early Mobius stuff, which like his short stories and illustrations and whatnot. And I follow a lot of Instagram accounts and online accounts that will post like a Mobius drawing a day. So like just countless examples of the work that he does, which is so fun.
Was heavy metal one of the first kind of big outlets for him, or was that like he was already pretty established by the time he starts working with those guys?
That's a great question. I want to say that he is like his notable works. I don't think many people would know of. Like the most notable works that he's known for is you can see the glow from my phone on my glasses giving me the information that fell out of my head. Blueberry, Arzak, The Long Tomorrow, Airtight Garage, The Inkall, and The World of Adina. I know The Inkall is one of his seminal, like one of his major works. It's like a very it's kind of like one of his larger stories that are kind of like Tarna in the way that it's a very arching space odyssey. Yeah, but he was esteemed by Federico Fellini, Stan Lee, and Hayao Miyazaki among others, and he's been described as the most influential bande dessinée artist after Hergé. Whoever, with respect to Hergé, I don't know who that is, but basically yeah, just a French artist, cartoonist, and writer, basically. Blueberry series created by John Michael, featuring one of the first anti-heroes in Western comics. Interesting, I did not know that. Okay, as Mobius, he achieved worldwide renowned fiction, science fiction, imaginative. I'm trying to find like if there's anything else that I can kind of hint on. Mobius also contributed storyboards and concept designs to several science fiction and fantasy films, such as Alien. So there we go, another connection there.
Oh yeah, yeah, they are. They do. That makes tons of fucking sense.
Yep. And then Tron, and then also The Fifth Element. Go figure. Yeah, The Fifth Element was also he did a lot of design for that, and The Abyss, believe it or not. Yeah. And
Oh, The
Blueberry
Abyss is
was
another
adapted for
great
the screen in
one.
2004, but that was a French publication. I don't think it made it to the States.
So what I do know about Tarna that I think is fucking fascinating is
Mm.
that he wrote it kind of as a wordless character. That's why she doesn't really talk that much. The original one is called Arzak, but Tarna, yeah, Arzak, right? Okay, Tarna isn't really in Arzak. It's a female animator who's working with Reitman while they're doing heavy metal who voices the following thought: maybe one of the stories should have a female protagonist. Maybe. And they're like, shit, yeah, maybe we should. And then they make Tarna gets created to be the protagonist in Arzak, and it gets changed to Tarna instead of Arzak. And then like, okay, so they were going to give her all this dialogue and change it up a little bit. But the director, John Bruno, signs on, and he's so influenced by Sergio Leone and spaghetti westerns that he's like, no, the original one was mute. I want it to be as if she's a lone gunman who barely talk. And so you wind up getting this female character, much like an Alien, and the whole, we keep coming back to Dan O'Bannon, where it's supposed to be a male character. We feminize it because we ask why not to feminize it maybe once. But we wind up keeping components of what we know to be stories and characters that are male. We just say, let's make it a lady. And so even though when you look at Tarna wearing armor that doesn't help anything.
Yeah.
It protects a little there.
Term. Yeah, armor's, yeah.
Shin guards, maybe would be the right word.
A couple, multiple belts that are an inch in length across selective portions of the anatomy, yeah.
But she's rotoscoped from a real woman, and so she has perfect proportions. She is gorgeous. The woman she's rotoscoped on is gorgeous. So when you're watching it and you want to respond to that image of the woman on the like pterodactyl birdie thing that's the cover of Heavy Metal, that's Tarna. You want to judge the movie and say, this is purient. And like the irony there is that is the one character who is the most
feminist. devoid of the issues that are in the movie, oddly enough. But then again, I know that I'm sorry, go ahead.
So go ahead. No, I've been talking. You go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, but although even in a 2026 mindset, you can even say that because it's like you could also see the seeds being planted of like when you have like these major video games where like the main character is female because you want to take care of her, and a lot of the plot that does happen in Tarna is motivated by having to halt the advances of men. So that is a very once again a cliche that does happen, does occur, but once again it's the idea of like giving this female protagonist agency and also the ability to communicating that this character, while may be still subjected to the men's gaze, can still lop the heads off of people that infringe on her agency. So I think
she still saves herself in those situations.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
She doesn't have to be saved.
Yes, and the story is like is a lot of the story. I would also say, kind of even despite like Den maybe being a rough second, but like Tarna has this fantastic relationship with her intergalactic steed, if you will. I can't remember the steed's name. I'm being a bad fan.
Has a name. I don't think it does really has a name. Bless.
Yeah, I do believe it has a name. I just cannot think of it.
We'll put it in the trivia.
Yeah, sure, do it. But yeah, so it's like, but yeah, I mean, like the story, but it is really, yeah, it's a great character-driven story that comes out of. It kind of does come out of nowhere after you've built up the expectations from watching the previous hour and some change of this movie, for sure.
Oh yeah, in fact, they loved the idea of Tarna so much that before the Lochnar got fully set in as the piece that would wind up connecting everyone, they thought, we'll have it be Tarna. And there was a moment where they were going to do a couple of additional segments and kind of break this story into pieces that happened in between the other vignettes. But when they got John Bruno on to direct, he was like, no, this is really good stuff. Please do not. Let me just do a whole piece and let it be what it is. And then they wound up creating the Lochnar and bringing it in. So that makes sense to me as well.
Sure.
I really, really love the scene where she is, it's like a reverse striptease. She swims over to the island and gets dressed. but gets dressed in the kind of like sensual manner that would also feel like getting undressed. And again, if you're going to come to this for weird things and you barely want to watch this movie, here's a weird way to come to this. Watch this clip for a wonderful example of reverse striptease, like eroticism of putting on clothing. Okay.
Yeah, very much. It's definitely the sci-fi equivalent of like the gearing up scene, but just done from a completely different angle that was I don't think was really explored that much at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
There's
really I really enjoy that, and the animation is gorgeous. There's a bunch of rotoscopes. The rotoscopes where she's flying on the steed are actual images from helicopters that they had their artists, the French artists,
no way.
drawn over. That's why they feel so like scratchy.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Oops, not that. Hold on a second. There was one point that I actually wanted to make on this, but I wanted to make
Mm-hmm.
sure I was correct on that. Is that
No
one of the
worries.
cool things that because Arzak, I knew that's where that came from. But there were all, but also I was thinking about how because Heavy Metal Magazine also like came out with a bunch of different communications publications. So like what I mean by that is that from like in the late '70s, so like the first year or so, they put out their magazine, but then they also put out compilation books of like concentrated stories and whatnot. Like called Heavy Metal Presents, and one of the things like one of them that they presented was Arzak, so from Mobius. But then another one was they did Barbarella the Moonchild. So I was watching like Tarna is kind of like a pro or like it's kind of like because this was also back in the time when like if you remember Barbarella was also the same kind of like vixen femme fatale character type that was kind of like a female version of Flash Gordon in a way, but Tarna is definitely its own kind of heavy metal IP version of that was curated by by the staff, which is really I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah,
Yeah, but yeah,
good
so
stuff.
that's that, and then but yes, but Tarna is really interesting, and actually Tarna to this day is kind of like the face of the company, so much so that and like which is this is neither here nor there, but like during 2022 when there was a cancellation of Heavy Metal Magazine, they're like this is one of these weird things where like Tarna is still very much a character, and I'll never forget it because it was so weird to me. But their Instagram account, they had been taken over by new social media. Whatnot Publishing was getting involved, and they had a couple people featuring. You had like a couple people that were like, "Hey, I'm your social media person. I am at comic book conventions. We're going to be talking about all the different projects we're doing." But on occasion, they would post a couple things, and one of the things that they did is that they got, I believe this artist, I don't remember, they had an artist do like they had a new story featuring Tarna, and Tarna had like this new space armor on, like actual armor. She looked really cool, like sheet white hair and like
Okay,
with all the red, like actual armor, like she was ready to go to war. She looked
okay.
like a war. She looked like a space marine, basically. I'll give you three guesses, and I think you only need one. What the reaction to that was?
They woke.
Yeah. Why'd you make her? Why'd you do that? Why'd you cover her up? That's not Tarna. That's not the Tarna. I want. That's stupid. Like I wanted to, like basically saying, basically just trying to, as pedantically say, I want to see boobs, and I'm like, I don't. Character's been around for 4 decades, dude. Like she can have armor. What? And it was, and of course, what ended up happening is that there was a double down because they're just like it's a drawing of the character. If you want to see Tarna the way that you've seen her, there's literally millions of other illustrations. This is part of a story where she gets in this armor and she kicks ass. That's just how the story is. And of course, I coined this. I always coin this because this is a line that I only heard from our friend JR of Opinions May Vary podcast. Is that for every action on the internet, there is an equal and opposite overreaction.
Yeah.
The physics of the internet. I've probably said it
Yeah.
before on this very channel, but the point still stands. Is that like, they were like, and then there was a lot of fallout, and then people were like heavy metal. A lot of guys that were just like, this isn't the heavy metal I like, just blowing it out of proportion, in my humble opinion. And then they changed it, and now Tarna, and it was fine. They also had other pictures, and then they went back to Tarna just looking the same. It was a very outrage, rage baity post that, and this day and age with the dead internet theory, who knows how many of those comments or whatever was true or not or what have you. The one thing that I can say through all that story is that it does show the fact that Tarna has, Tarna is a legacy character for heavy metal. Like, it is so much so to the point that there are stories for Tarna, but I don't think there's any collected editions that I've seen. I might be wrong though. I might be woefully underinformed, but that is definitely something like I'm actually kind of shocked we never got to see like a full Tarna film that was a little bit more, exploratory or expanded the lore or did anything interesting like that. I feel like it was a very left alone option on the table. But yeah.
It's also very fascinating that it becomes so part of the magazine's legacy because she gets created for the movie. So like it's a beautiful way for the magazine has given so much to the movie and the movie's like here's something back and it just
Yeah.
folds back into itself. You're like, oh cool. I again it's kind of funny to people like this isn't the original Tarna from I want to say Metal Hammer magazine, Heavy Metal
It's okay.
magazine.
Yeah, yeah.
And you're like, yeah, she was from the movie, not the magazine. Get your shit together. If you're a real fan, you want to just
Yeah.
poke those people. I mean, because there's so many examples of like Samus from
Yeah.
Metroid.
Samus Aran,
Like
Metroid. Yeah, yeah.
full armor happens to be a woman, but people
Mm-hmm.
are constantly like, yeah, but draw her outside of the armor, and you're like,
Yeah.
why are you like this?
The internet's only made it worse, unfortunately, because it's just amplified those things. I mean, luckily, I think the internet's been around for like however long. I mean, that will always exist because there are always people from all ages online. But I feel like we're getting to a point where that, as a cultural touch point, I think is being phased out in a way. It's just
Mm.
changing. I hope it's for the better. Cross my fingers and toes, and hopefully that'll be less of a driving issue.
Yeah, I think that like even when you do armor on women in certain things like this, it's mostly just like chrome boob. What's your fucking problem? Like you're still
Yeah,
getting boob. It's just a different texture.
yeah,
I
yeah.
definitely saw a lot of Dark Souls boss character design in some of these heavy metal things, especially in Tarna at
Yes.
the end, where you're like, "Our little devil may cry," or "Oh, she looks like
Hmm.
Ivy from Soul Calibur." That kind
Yeah.
of like, okay. So like it just keeps getting recycled. I think we love to play around with the idea of people being turned on while they're being beat up by these characters. I mean, Aeon Flux is another example of it. Like we came back to
Oh
it
yeah.
earlier. So like
Yep.
it's not even that the audience wants to just see boobs. Like we know you want to see boobs kick your butt too. So fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. The Wonder Woman. The
Although I did love the pushback on the redesign on Tomb Raider. They gave her pants and a shirt, and people were like, "No," because everybody hates change. And the company and I was like, "Tough.
yeah.
Go play
Sorry.
one of the old games. We don't give a shit. There's like 7 older games. There's one where her boobs are literal boxes. You can play that one too."
Yeah. Yeah. That and that. Yeah. So I mean, luckily, I think a lot of that just exists online. I thought, but like as long as the story's good and the character's compelling, I think that's all that matters for me personally. But yeah, I said that story to point out the fact that like the Tarna has become iconic in the mainstream in that way, or at least the people
Mm-hmm.
that remember it.
Yeah.
And then sometimes that can get in its own way, because it's also the same reason why, like, which actually, that even though we're not at the exact end of the movie, but I can get back into like one of the other things that we were talking about that we're going to save to the end, is that heavy metal magazine, well, heavy metal in general, because of all those things I told you about, where they were going through different, like, their trajectory was difficult to kind of control because it was always something weird happening, or
Yeah.
like a project wasn't reaching out, or like they weren't making enough money to kind of expand past what they wanted to do. For a hot minute, heavy metal tried to make their own media company where they were like trying to like they had started making their own personal comic books as well. So like there's a yeah, Interceptor. It was a big was one of their was one of like their four main comic book titles that came out. I saw that when I was at but that's kind of like since changed. Like I don't know, a lot of that stuff has been left in limbo because because ran out of money or whatever, and then changed hands, and then the people that changed hands
Mhm.
didn't know what was going on. So there's a lot of like I said, with unpaid artists and whatnot, that was a big issue. But the point being is that the heavy metal magazine has always struggled because of like issues like that, where it's like the fandom and the fan base is so niche and site specific. It's very difficult for it to expand outside of that, even though it is so much more in a lot of ways.
Mm.
And where you get to its
Mhm.
legacy being is that
Mm.
for the longest time, this is maybe something that I'm going to say that you might know already, but for the longest time, they've been trying to make a new, like, there are a bunch of creators that have been trying very hard to make either a heavy metal show or another heavy metal movie, and it had been stuck in production hell for a long time. And the most famous example is Tim Miller, who directed Deadpool, and like yeah, like he had been working on it for years, like decades, like because they had gotten the rights to it, him and it was going to be like a thing where he was getting a bunch of directors to create their own segments. So it was going to be Tim Miller being
Yeah.
at the head of it all, organizing it. He was going to have Zack Snyder do a segment. He was going to have Robert Rodriguez do a segment. Jack Black was going to get involved in producing a segment as well. A couple other people from like I think Guillermo del Toro might have was hit up for it a little bit too. Yeah, but like it was in
Why
development
doesn't
hell
it
because
exist?
here's the reason, and it's because heavy metal as a brand is still so rooted. Everyone just thinks of it like, oh no, that's the dirty magazine that for kids that when we were all 13, whatever, when we were 15 years old. So it just never gets the funding. It never got the traction in Hollywood. So you know what Tim Miller did after like working on it for like 10 15 some odd years, he's like, fine, you know what? Fuck it. If I can't do it, if I can't do it underneath this thing, I'm gonna do my own version of it. And that became Love, Death, and Robots. Yep.
Shut your face. Shut your
Yeah.
fucking face.
Yeah. That's
That's
yeah.
the
That's
and that's a rock fact.
yeah.
That is fantastic. That's the best fact of this night today. The trophy for best fact goes to. That
Yeah.
makes so much sense. And how good is that as an
Yeah.
anthology?
It
I'm
breaks my
okay.
heart.
You went from me being like, I'm going to kill somebody that this movie didn't get made to, well, if that's what had to die to make what is so very beautiful, then I understand.
Yeah, and it's so perfect because and it's the exact same thing. It's an anthology.
Mm-hmm.
It does everything that heavy metal had done, even in the original movie. Even though it's
Mm-hmm.
done a little bit different, where like there you have your episodes. I'm assuming most people that listen are familiar with Love, Death, and Robots. It's on. I think it's going on its what, fourth season.
Yeah. Fourth
Yeah,
season,
but it's the
Netflix,
same thing.
very
Yeah.
easy to get a hold of. Very
Yes.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Just for a short tangent, we're going to shout out your favorite episode of Love, Death, and Robots. Do you have a single favorite one?
God, I couldn't. I don't know if I could.
Just
Each, they're so good. The Spanish Lady of the Lake one is so good. The animation
Jibaro?
style on that. Yes, thank you.
Jibaro?
Yes,
That was the
yes.
one I was going to say. So whenever I'm trying to get people to watch this and they're not sure if it's something, because it's an anthology, you can jump in wherever you want. I put on Jibaro for them and I'm like, this is
Mhm.
fully animated. And then usually by the end of that, I can tell whether they're going to want to watch the whole thing because that is breathtaking.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
the first and like I like this one just because it definitely rubs elbows with like kind of like horror and cinema and whatnot. But I like the one I can't remember, the names are falling off my head. I should have.
It's okay.
I geared up. I geared up the fact not doing the follow up work, but the one where the spaceship gets adrift and then and then they find that being, like that one is so good.
Mm-hmm.
Like it breaks
Mm-hmm.
my heart being like, man, this could have been heavy metal, and I would have loved to have seen like the cool stuff that would have come out of heavy metal if it had gone underneath that banner. Because Love, Death, and Robots checks all the boxes, but it does it in such like that is the primary literal and spiritual successor to what heavy metal started really.
Mm-hmm.
And like even nowadays, like in the couple years where heavy metal kind of went under, and it was like when that news broke, even in the comic world, there were so many people that were so bummed out about it that there are a number of magazines now that are putting out their own heavy metal like publications now. Like they're play what is it? It's the first one is Distillery. Distillery is another one where like it's an anthology but also a continuing stories where you have like these 3 or 4 issue stories that are written by people that write in that way. And there are 2 other versions like it where it's a magazine size story. It's a graphic novel. And the stories revolve around different genres. So like there's some that are cyberpunk in space. There are some that are horror, and there are some that are just kind of off the wall and paranormal or thriller, and they're really great. And I'm trying to think. There's a play Penthouse. Penthouse. Sorry, that's a random word to just shout out of the ether out of nowhere.
Yeah, the
Penthouse
Playboy
actually has
alternative.
yeah. Penthouse actually ended up making their own in-house version of heavy metal, and it was actually like it was really well received. Like they had great creators. They gave them complete autonomy to just make whatever stories they wanted, and they were like, "It's
Right.
underneath the Penthouse, yeah, so you can do whatever you want." And yeah, and and they're really cool stories. And I mean, most of the content you see out now, like I mean, Image Comics, I would argue that almost every successful Image comic that I read or is out on Image Comics right now could have gotten it started in heavy metal. There's so many good stories where it's like it just has that. I mean, less with the graphic material, obviously, because Image is still very much very much PG-13, or depending on what the story is.
Yeah.
But there's yeah, it's like heavy metal's legacy in terms of what they explored and what they did is so far wide and reaching in so many ways, and that it inspired so many people to kind of to explore genre and story in that way. And it's almost kind of one of those things where it's like, is heavy metal like a thing that everyone's kind of grown out of, or is it something that can it afford to grow out of what it used to be into a new version of itself without alienating the people that love it so much? It's just a lot of questions, but yeah, but that's what
Yeah.
that is.
Yeah. And you also, it's funny that you would mention Guillermo del Toro in that because he winds up doing his own anthology, The Cabinet of Curiosities.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of Filipino anthology horror stuff. Like we are
Mm-hmm.
now getting so much. I think people are super Black Mirror kind of. You could consider
Yeah.
that an anthology if you just sit there and watch a whole season at once. Like we're more into anthologies now than ever, so perhaps this is the best time to finally see what heavy metal is like because you're witnessing things that are a fucking result of its shot in the dark back in the 80s. Yeah, I had no, that's so fascinating. I love that. We're on our final scene here. This is just the coda that you get. After Tarna, we come back to our original house with the girl and the Lochnar, and the Lochnar is supposed to be destroying her, but we see Tarna destroy the Lochnar in her universe, and that bleeds in. And when you think of the fact that I just told you about how they originally wanted Tarna to be the connective tissue, that
Yeah.
like, oh, this starts to make sense. So they decided to really, by having her go into the last bit of the connective tissue, and the little girl who we've been watching the whole time kind of becomes Tarna in the way that Den becomes Den in his sequence. We sort of see that. It almost feels a little bit like trying to put a bow on it, and they're like, and so for the rest of blah blah blah, and you're like, okay, well, I mean, I didn't need this.
Yeah.
I like the stories, but I didn't need this. I don't know. How does the ending land for you?
No, that's a fair way. Yeah, I think that's a fair way of going about it because it's very clear that like I appreciate the effort of trying to button it up in that way.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they probably, I don't know. Like, look, I'm not a. If it were my call to make, I might have like landed on doing something a little bit more nebulous, but that's just because that's just what I
Mm-hmm.
like. But I mean, it's still it's
Mm-hmm.
an ending. It's an ending, and to see the character that's been, it is a payoff in seeing this character that's just been spoken to throughout this entire thing and traumatized by this, this evil being all of a sudden become overfilled and then is now free to like there is something very rewarding and something very inspiring in that. I would
Mm-hmm.
say that definitely kind
Mm-hmm.
of helps lessen the blow. How we get there, it probably could have landed there a little bit more diligently. But for what it is, I thought it was fine.
They do a really good job of, again, you're going to get me with a graphic match or a reference every time. She's running out of the house and she's in the field, and there's the composition of her body looking back at the house in the lower
Mm.
left and the house in the top right, which you see all the time because it's a reference to Christina's painting, the painting
Oh
with the
yeah,
little, the one from like the 50s. It's a Wyeth painting. Like you see it in
yes,
people's dorms every now and then. It's a painting of a real woman from let's like pull up the facts if I get her name right. It's from 48. It's a painting of Anna Christina Olsen, and she
okay.
had polio, and as a result of her polio, she couldn't walk. She was paralyzed
Oh,
from the
yeah, yeah.
waist down. But she refused to use a wheelchair. She would just drag herself from place to place, and she lived on this farm. And so we're seeing a picture of her dragging herself towards the house. And so it's a symbol of isolation and like endurance and
Mm.
perseverance. And that's like, oh yeah, our character, she was alone the whole time. She was strong enough to endure, and we're watching her persevere over this. Like, okay, nice job, Heavy Metal. You didn't have to make an art history reference, but you did.
I'm glad you did.
It's another example of like, it's not just boobs, guys, okay? Like,
Yeah,
it's nuanced, okay?
yeah, yeah, for sure.
The number one reason I would probably cut this scene or maybe think about not ending with this scene is because they did run out of money and they rotoscoped the house. So where you see the house explode at the end, it was supposed
Yeah,
to be animated on top of that, but if you actually watch the movie, you just see the plastic model explode. It goes from animated to plastic model to explosion. And but also like there's something about that that's charming.
yeah, I agree. And especially nowadays with animation being so varied, is actually technically is a little bit more progressive than I think most people think. Because now, like, what there's like Smiling Friends, Gumball, the Fantastic World of Gumball, where like all of these innovative illustration styles are like blending different illustrations where you have 2D interacting with 3D, and then clay live action and like claymation and whatnot, stop motion. Like it's I'm reaching here for to give it flowers, but it is kind of like it is very Ralph Bakshi in that way, where you're like, this is they you solved it by doing what you could with what you had, and that is
Yeah.
a okay.
And that's another kind of almost hint to another animation technique, which, kind of fun to talk about because we're talking about stop animation. I was recently watching Dragon Slayer. I don't know if you know that movie.
Dragon Slayer. I've heard of
Dragon
it, but
Slayer.
I never saw it.
It's a fantastic, another one of those sword and stone 80s action movies. It's from 81. Okay, so it is from exactly the same year. That's
Oh
why
wow.
it feels like it's from exactly the same year. Um, it's got Peter McNichol as the main character. He's the guy from the second Ghostbusters where the painting comes and gets everybody. He's
Oh
the
yeah, yeah.
little art historian guy, with
Oh
the
yeah, that guy's
accent and the
great.
curly hair. So this was like early 80s when they let the lead man have curly hair. So it's fun to watch this movie for the sheer fact of like is the lead. He's the like hero of okay. But why you should really watch this is because Phil Tippett did the character design for the dragon, and he's like
Nice.
prolific. So he original early ILM, beautiful, still holds up to this day. And they kind of invented a thing for that they called go motion, which was they would blend stop motion with use of actual puppets. And so they stop
Okay.
motion and then go motion, which is like individual scenes of puppets moving.
Oh wow.
So
Okay.
that's kind of what that felt when we get to this point here where you're like, oh, okay, so the house explodes. Like goes from stop animation to real animation. I've seen that. I've seen that before in movies from
Yeah.
exactly this same year, Katie. Damn it. Damn it.
Well, what kind of throws me is that the model of the house, it was bothering me the entire time I was watching that movie because I'm like, this house in Heavy Metal that's featured, it looks so familiar. I'm like, was this episode like does this like I feel like this house was either featured on an episode of the Twilight Zone or something. Like it just feels I was actually trying to find information, being like, where is this house coming from? Because like it is a very specific house. It is like this,
Yeah.
old white colonial, has like a little circle in the front, and it looks like it looks like a house that belonged that was used in like a horror film or somewhere that I just cannot put my eye on. Like I have to do the research and try and find it.
Mm. Yeah, I'll put some legs on that as well because it does feel so. Again, this is the problem where you're like, is it familiar because I've seen this movie so many times, or is it
Right.
triggering something else, or is it triggering something else that's referencing this movie? Like,
Yeah.
hard,
Exactly.
hard telling, not knowing, and so that's where our movie wraps up. Kind of puts a little coda on it, kind of sets it off into this climactic movie about self-sacrifice and persevering against evil. So yeah, like again, for it to end on that tone and be accused of being mostly about sex is like not really. That's not even how it tries to end.
Yeah, it is true. Yeah, there is definitely an earnest attempt at trying to like tell stories that yeah they do use those as vessels, but there is still a lot of narrative meat on the bone instead of a lot of the instead of the kind of stereotype. It is actually also fascinating that I think anyone watching this now, having watched the last 10 years of cinema, if they're going back and watching Heavy Metal, they'll probably be like, a lot of this is kind of pretty tame right now, like
Yeah,
by today's standards. Because I'm
touche.
like, yeah, because we with like, it was Heavy Metal any more graphically violent than Game of Thrones? Like, I don't know. Like, to
It's
just
not
throw out
more
a
than the
random,
boys, I will guarantee you that.
yeah, right, exactly. But yeah, so I hopefully that kind of the helps pique any interest of people,
Yeah,
and also just like yeah, just learning more. Hopefully, even just listening to this, you're inspired to check out a little bit more of like the work that came out of heavy metal and the people and the artists that we discussed. Hopefully, that'll
mm-hmm.
help branch you out and you get to see a lot
Mm-hmm.
of really cool stuff that just because it's not on a multi-billion-dollar streaming platform, or because it's not it's not in a commercial, doesn't mean that it doesn't have its worth, that it's not worth seeking out.
Yeah.
I like in a lot of the artwork and a lot of artists. It's like the Calvin and Hobbes legacy, if you will,
Mm.
where it's like Calvin and Hobbes exists today. It's still in print. It's still a very widely received medium because everyone that loved it bought the books and then handed those books down to their children. Not
Yeah.
I'm not saying you should do that with your issue. I'm not saying you should. I'm not saying maybe you shouldn't do that with your children with heavy metal, but I'm saying that there are legacy there are legacy things that you can do for like more like looking at Mobius's work and passing that on
Yeah.
is absolutely something that you can do. Yeah, or at least wait until your kids get older. But I think that'd just be weird.
But you hit on a very accurate point. If you watch any segment or engage with any bit of heavy metal and you think that looks cool or that seems interesting, there's an artist that worked on that part of it that you can go look more at. You can look more at, like we were saying, McKee's ships. He designed tons of ship drawings. Even outside of the stories that he wrote, he did a bunch of interesting drawings. You could go look at more Mobius art without having to look at sexualized art. You or if you want to look at more sexualized, you can. Like it's more of a gateway to all of this stuff that you might not know existed because you told yourself you're not a 13-year-old boy in the 80s, which might be true. Who of us is?
Yeah, all of us were once at one point in time, as I like to benevolently declare.
We are both in a state of not being that person and always being that person.
Yeah, I remember. I remember so that way I don't repeat the same mistakes I made when I was when
God, well,
I
you're a
remember.
smart
I
person
remember.
for
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Learn from the past so as to not to repeat it. but also my bones and joints are reminding me that every day anyway. So,
Oh my fucking god. Yeah, that's true. Um, I was gonna say while we were going through, popped off about which was my favorite and which was my least favorite segment.
yeah,
Let's nail that down for you. Least favorite, best favorite?
sure. You know what? Tarna was probably my favorite. I would have to say, yeah, Tarna was really good. I mean, yeah, my least favorite. I don't know. Like least favorite might be. I'm probably in the minority here in opinion on this, but like B-17, it didn't tickle me the way that the
Okay.
other sequences do, and
I
I say that all fully acknowledging that it is well animated, it is really cool. Just the
mhm.
pacing, it makes my ADHD brain kind of like wander off. That's all.
Okay. I appreciate your honesty there. We pinned this for earlier. Let's dive into it now. Do you think that this movie could be remade right now? I mean, we just talked about robots. Like, I wanted to say no, and then you told me about that, and I'm like, it already has, sweetheart,
Yeah.
and you fucking love
Well,
it.
but I mean, that's a double edged sword on that. Is that it got remade, but in order to be remade, it couldn't be heavy metal. Like the powers that be did not allow it to be remade in its own image,
Mm,
unfortunately. So I think it's kind of an odd yes no type of situation. Like it can be remade, it just needs to be named something else. You just can't, you got to hide your work. Like I mean, truly, and yeah, yeah. So I don't know, and I think like there's not a like I don't think it's really because sorry, geez, I have too many thoughts and only one mouth with which to speak,
they're
so
all
I
jamming at the
apologize.
door at the same time.
Truly, yeah, you just heard three voices in my head all try and talk at the same time. Apologies for the verbal traffic. The point being is that um, I don't think heavy metal, just by the nature of what it is precious enough that if somebody were to try and remake it, I don't think anyone would be like, "No, you shouldn't." But then again, I don't know. It all just depends. It would have to be remade by the right people in the right way. Because like they were trying to remake The Crow, and that was awful, and that was a bummer. Um, like I wanted to love it because I was like, but I don't think it's that. I don't think heavy metal was ever that precious. But yeah, if you had a good budget, like I would love to see like a revamped take on Tarna, or like or something that re-explores a lot of the things of the nature of what heavy metal is. I would love to see more of, just because it is content that is made based on the work of illustrators and artists that are also working hand in hand with videographers and writers and directors and production staff. And yeah, so yeah,
So
the
yeah,
spirit of it will always live on, but seeing it as it is right now is a 1-to-1.
yeah, because when we talk about remade, is it a reboot? Is it a remake? Is it a sequel, prequel, origin story? All of those things come in. But you're a big fan of heavy metal music, and I often I'm from the sidelines. I am aware of heavy metal music, but I often find this is also like my opinion about Marvel stuff, where it's like the more I want to know about it, the less can feel welcome in the space, and it gets a little scary sometimes. And so I'm like, I don't want to be a girl who wants to talk about heavy metal music online because I don't want to fight with people. But my husband loves heavy metal music, so I like to learn from him. And what I hear a lot of division within the people who like this genre of music over what is allowed to be categorized this style of music. So to make this movie at a period of time when this music is more of an open genre makes sense. If we did it now and we used new artists, because why would we use the old ones? We should make a new one. I think people would fight endlessly over which ones were even allowed to be used.
Maybe, yeah, that would certainly that I agree with you on that. That it would certainly be a point of contention, no matter what is chosen. There would definitely be opinions for and against. I mean, like it'd be kind of man. Could we? I know we've been at it for a while, but my brain just like, man, could we write as what soundtrack would we make for if we were to relaunch a heavy metal? Like what soundtrack? What songs we would have? Like Metallica would definitely have to be in there for sure. Like I mean, me personally, I would love like to see like Slipknot, like yeah, just like 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 what's grown up as like traditional metal at this point from the 80s
I
and
would even
onward.
put Metalocalypse in there. I know it's a bit of a
Oh
joke,
yeah,
but they literally doing animated music. Like I'm sure
it'd be
Metalocalypse is
perfect.
deeply inspired by Metal Hammer by heavy metal.
Yeah, Brendan Small would absolutely he would probably illustrate a segment in it, to be perfectly honest.
That would
It
be a
would be
key
amazing to
choice
get him
for
in on that.
me. Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. With the humor and the brutality of like what Death Clock is, like that would fit in so well. Mwah! Chef's kiss.
Yeah, because sometimes when I'll look at a metal magazine like a Metal Hammer versus, say, there's another one from the US versus the UK one.
Oh yeah, there's Metal Injection over over here. Metal Hammer I know is a big one. Yeah, man.
There's like a
Circus?
one
No,
word one. I'll
sure.
probably I'll tell you, but like Metal Hammer is at least pretty good about being like, there's all this metal, different
Mm,
metal. And the one that I read in the United States was just constantly like this and only this and none of these guys. And like so there was this like
yeah,
anger built into this judgment that makes me also wonder like I don't know if I would want to take that on if I wasn't someone well within the culture like Red Smalls,
mm,
or even if Metallica themselves were like, hey, you know what, we want to be in charge of this. Any band that
right.
felt like they had enough standing to pick people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and also I kind of want to even, and maybe I'm doing it. I'm putting on my artist cap again, where it's just
Mm,
like heavy metal was always kind of like it was kind of a name plucked from the ether because it was the idea that heavy metal at the time was brand new, it was edgy, it pushed
mhm.
boundaries. At least that's the idea or the things associated with it. But now, as the magazine had progressed, there were definitely way more examples of heavy metal actually involving like heavy metal, where there would be like issues that would be curated by members of metal acts and stuff like that. But so it became more ingrained in heavy metal. However, that's not to say that the entirety of heavy metal magazine is fueled solely by the musical genre. It
Yeah.
just kind of serves as a vessel or as an entryway into the content of the book. As a matter of fact, most of the work that I think, not most, but like there are some stories that are clearly influenced by heavy metal and the harder styles of music,
Mhm.
but there are plenty or just as many that are just inspired by the visuals, because heavy metal also at that time it was like the classic like literal like metal chrome, like the wizards, the wizards spanning. I mean, I would love to do that just because there are so many genres that, like, I would love to see like a segment that uses doom metal, stoner doom metal, so that way you get your sword and sorcery.
Mm,
Do like your hair metal, so that way you can get like your cyberpunk like or like
mhm.
road like Mad Max type of vibe and whatnot. But it's just there's so much
Yeah.
music now, it's just kind of difficult to even pin something down because everything is everywhere. There's so
Well,
much.
yeah,
Yeah,
when we're talking about the movie, we would have to include the music. It has to be based on
yeah,
a music soundtrack, and it's
yeah,
very hard to keep the IP if it's called heavy metal and we're like, yeah, but the soundtrack is new
right,
wave. Although
yeah,
I did
no, that's
just hear
fair.
about yesterday there's an album out called 20 Best Jazz
Throbbing Gristle.
Folk. Yeah, yeah, where it's like the songs are not jazz nor are they new wave and there's only 7.
Yeah, it's that's from a band called Throbbing Gristle, which is like an industrial metal band that is ridiculous.
You.
That's their third
Thank you.
album, I believe, and their first album is
Yes.
called, yeah, their first
The
album. Yeah,
best
so you,
of part 2.
yes, exactly. Like yeah, and like Throbbing Gristle rule. Like they're another band that's just was really good, but like it just one of those great acts that just kind of slipped through the
Yeah.
cracks at the time. Yeah,
So yeah, we would be up against that, and then we probably would also be up against the problem of if you book acts over different um um what am I thinking? Record companies, different
mm,
labels. It's gonna be
yeah,
hard to get everybody on the same CD. It's gonna get everybody
for sure.
like, and then who's making it? So then you start getting put into this like, well, we have this and this and this on the soundtrack because that's who's on Sony, and you're like, great, but that's not the
Yeah,
best representation of this music. Why? So why bother doing it if you can't do it perfect? And it seems like it would be
it's
very
true.
hard to do it perfect. But
Yeah,
I'm relieved to think about how good Love, Death, and Robots is.
yes. For sure. And once again, like in Love, Death and Robots, like they do use iconic soundtrack, but they don't necessarily use as much heavy metal. And it's because they made,
Hmm.
but once again, it's because they needed to differentiate between from it so that way they could get it made.
Yeah.
But like, yeah. Yeah, I mean, good lord, I could talk about metal for way too long. But like, because it's also difficult, because like heavy metal is also like a lot of people consider it to be on the down, on the, it's like it's on a downwind right now, because there's not a lot of like classically heavy, like there's legacy metal acts of course, but like metal in terms of like new metal acts coming out, like there's a bunch of them, but none of them are getting mainstream play. Like I think,
Hmm.
like you have your rock radio stations that still play metal obviously, but they play like Shine Down and Three Doors Down, and no bad, no bad blood thrown their way. I mean, they're doing their thing, and like they're wildly successful bands, but like the metal is the underground, or at least it is for me, and like the people that I work with. Like I did I recently recorded an episode of a podcast called CD Mix Playlist, and with a gentleman by the name of Mike Hilt, that's based out of Chicago. But like, in the whole gimmick of the podcast is that you make a playlist that's 80 minutes long, so that's about like a dozen and a half songs, and you talk about the playlist. And I ended up making my lit playlist being about music that I'd either done artwork for or fan artwork for, or done or have done artwork for festivals that these bands have played at. So, and it
Yeah.
was about 15 lists. I won't get into it too much, but like I did have a bunch of bands. I did a bunch of some hip hop acts that I've done work with and stuff, or that I've done fan art for and whatnot, and some ska. But like the majority of it was metal, because I do a lot of work for metal festivals, and I work with a lot of metal musicians in Western Mass, and it's all DIY or die. It's the same thing as like punk. Like the bands that are out there making it happen, like they're not the ones that are being signed to these record deals, because they're just not. It just makes no sense. And but like they're still, doesn't make them any less amazing. Oh, a lot of them are on, like they're all indie labels. They're not like Warner Brothers Records or
Oh
something like
yeah.
that, as an arbitrary example.
But it's not
But
like
yeah,
their
so
shit
you just
isn't
gotta find them.
available on a produced CD. Like they're still making well produced records. They're just independent.
Yes.
I think we're seeing even more of that in the film industry now. Like get
Yeah.
to the
Yeah, with
end
Iron
and
Lung.
can it before you let somebody else touch it because they're gonna fuck it up with their shit.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah, Markiplier. I would love to talk to you about Markiplier and Iron Lung sometimes, because I feel like you would have a lot to say about that in terms of like circumventing the whole industry and then kind of doing your
yes.
thing.
I
Yeah.
still need to see it though, so I have to see it
Sure.
first.
Of course.
I did not rush out to see it, but I do very much intend to, and I love that model and that idea and how well it seems to have already been doing.
Yeah.
But
It's made its five times. Sorry, go ahead.
as we move towards the end here, because we're running a little long, which I knew we were gonna do because there's so much fucking meat on this bone here, guys. It's a good movie.
Yeah.
I did want to say this is the perfect time to kind of just shout out to the heavy metal collective that
Oh,
is in our area, that's in East Hampton, Massachusetts, that you're a part of, my husband's a part of, I want to get involved with. I think this is the perfect. Let's talk about them. Tell people about Thick.
yeah, sure. Happy to. Yeah. So a couple years ago, a bunch of people that also help organize RPM Fest that happens in Western Mass every year, they all got together and were like, "Yeah, we love making a festival once every year and revolving around that, but we also want to have something a little bit more constant. We want to make something that like we want to make a venue and have that venue be serve all of the alternative music under the heavy idea, but it's a co-op. It's about, I think I think we just broke 300 members right now that are all like that are actually like
Awesome.
paid members. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was really great, because but it's been a long time going. We It's thick, the heavy, which stand THCC, which stands for the Heavy Culture Cooperative.
I said it wrong. Sorry. Thanks
No,
for
it's okay. No, you're good.
correcting.
No, it's
I'm
fine.
just trying to not say THC like THC.
Yeah. But no, yeah. So yeah, but thick is it's 300 people now, and we just we just opened up a new building. Like there are members that range from music producers, audio technicians, East Hampton State Council members, East Hampton Council members, I should say, just all walks of life, which is really great. And so you get a great pool of talent to work with. And it took us a little while. It took us a couple years to finally land on a venue. We ended up taking over the old massage school that's in East Hampton Center. If you're not familiar with the area, that's okay. It's just that's all I'll say about it. But they've renovated it. It is now a bar room and a venue room, and they recently just started booking and playing shows on February 14th. And so we've been averaging about 1 to 3 shows a week since mid-February, and they're booking out all the way. They're booking all the way out, which is great.
Yeah, but who have watched this show before know Conan Neutron, and he just texted me today to say, "Is this near you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's the town I'm in." He booked a show in June, so you can
Well,
see
yeah, they're
Conan
booked
if you
out.
can see Conan Neutron in June in East Hampton. Like, if you're looking for a new music venue, guess what, guys?
Yeah, and it's an art venue, and it's trying to be a venue that serves
Yeah.
the community in a myriad of ways as well. Like I'm on a few working groups for it, but I'm also part of the gaming committee there too. So I've been running a D&D campaign there with like a couple people, a couple friends that Kay and Colin are from the
Mm-hmm.
Starwell Foundation. So Kay being Mary Dare, and then Colin being oh no, I can't think of his name. His character works for the Starvale Foundation. He's the one that likes being on the microphone. He has the line. He's like, Mary is like, "Oh, you want to get a selfie with the heroes?" He goes, "Oh." He's like, "Oh, they always want to get selfies with the at the gala." Um, he's the funny quick speaking. But yeah, he voices a character in the show basically. But yeah, so they're a part of it with a couple other members of the group, and so there's gaming on Sundays from 2 to 9 every week as of right now, and then there's space to like run your own games. I'm running my own drink and draw night there on Thursdays.
Thursdays, yeah.
Yeah, and right now the venue, the bar room is open from Wednesday to Sunday. We're looking to expand hours as we've been booking a lot more shows, and yeah, but we're also looking out for being like trying to get trivia going on there maybe to get some
Mm-hmm.
like film festivals. We're trying to get an art gallery, some sort of form of an art gallery there, but that's like that's dealing with more with space more so than not. But yeah, there's just a lot of cool people doing a lot of really interesting things there. So yeah,
And it's got a great parking lot too, so it's very good
yes,
parking, very easy to get to because it's in the center of town. I love both those aspects. It's a beautiful old brick building, so that's cool.
yeah,
I've I've been seeing a lot of desire to do more community outreach, like maybe even a garden out front. And I see Wake the Dead Donuts parked out front. That's another community business that sells adorable, delicious mini donuts that you can get there. Like it just feels so wonderful to really see like, oh, this whole community is coming together and it's around a style of music that people often say is off-putting and aggressive and mean and the cause of violence, and you're like, these
yeah,
guys, these
hmm,
guys, they've done more
yeah.
for the town in like the last year. That Okay, I think you might be wrong.
Yeah, and it's really great because it's not just it's not your it is a community of people that all go to shows, and
Yeah.
people from all walks of life, all backgrounds, which is really rad. And everyone there is just really chill, and just people that just like either like playing music or just like hanging out. Heavy is the umbrella term, but I know they're playing. They play ska there,
Mm-hmm.
industrial noise band, noise punk, rock, thrash,
Mm-hmm.
metal, the whole gamut. Basically anything that if it falls under even atmospheric, like they'll do dungeon synth night, which is not necessarily what you consider to be like traditional heavy music, but it
That's
is
cool.
like as experimental noise stuff. So
Well, that's
yeah,
the essence of industrial, right? Experimental
yeah,
noise. Yeah.
exactly. So yeah. So take it back to throbbing gristle, but yeah. So it's just really cool because they're all just people that are in and around Western Mass,
Mm-hmm.
and we're just growing. And like the parking lot is really big. They want to try and do some outdoor festivals. I know the other big
Mm-hmm.
thing is that that we're trying to work with arts night out, so that way we can
Mm.
actually help bridge the gap between Eastworks and the rest of the town when they're doing citywide events. So that way you can actually walk to
Mm.
places. So that is an excuse. You can walk to Eastworks and then walk to an event at Thick and then walk to Red Frame Gallery and then all that stuff. So
Mm.
that way, just trying to add one more stop on the day when there's a big event happening.
I bet that would work out really well. That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool stuff. Maybe we should show get a night and show heavy metal there.
Yeah. So I'm sure they would love
Movie
it. Heck
night.
yeah.
Yeah. I know that the library is annexing that larger building that used to be the Bank of America, and they're
Yes.
turning it into places where you can watch free movies. So they'll be doing a monthly movie thing. The East Hampton Film
Oh, no
Festival
way.
is helping curate some of them. But yeah,
Oh,
all of
that's
a
awesome.
sudden our community is putting together all of these like free events and things, and we're finding all these spaces and rehabbing them. It's
Oh,
pretty
that's so
cool.
cool. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
rad.
guys, if you're listening to this and you don't live in East Hampton, Massachusetts, sorry. And it looks like that is gonna have to be it. We're gonna cut it a little bit right there. Brett's iPad died, but we were right at the end. I want to say thanks so much for being on the show. As if we need to thank him for being here and telling us all that cool stuff, especially the facts about Love, Death, and Robots, and then the fact about Kevin Eastman. It came hard. I don't even think there's gonna be a trivia segment for this, guys, because we got so much stuff in here. Maybe a 5-minute trivia segment to cover a couple of things that we didn't get to. Anyway, thank you so much for tuning in. This one ran long because there was so much to cover, and we love hanging out with Brett. Thanks for joining in. I'll see you next time. And of course, the trivia part of the show now comes out on the 1st. So this is the 15th of March, and you're seeing the episode. Gonna have to wait until the 1st of April. I swear it's not a joke. That's when the rest of it will come out. I'm dividing them to give people a little bit of an amuse-bouche in the back end. You'll get a little like 5 to 10 minute segment about omissions, trivia, things that we didn't cover, things that we need to go back over. Just encouraging people to come back to the episodes, formatting it a little different. It'll help this episode from running to 3 hours. Bye, everybody.